Everything you trust about reality could collapse tonight. Why do official records quietly contradict eyewitness accounts surrounding impossible vanishings, cursed relics, frozen echoes, nameless figures? Every revelation sharpens dread, inviting relentless questions without comforting answers, compelling fearless viewers onward despite mounting terror, because truth refuses silence forever, waiting ahead alone. On a quiet hillside overlooking the city of Niterói, Brazil, a patch of dense vegetation rises above neighborhoods filled with the sounds of everyday life. The slope, known as Vintém Hill, appears ordinary at first glance. Trees sway gently in the coastal breeze, narrow footpaths disappear into thick undergrowth, and scattered rocks break the silence of the landscape. Yet this peaceful location has become permanently linked to one of the most puzzling, unsolved cases in modern history. A mystery that continues to challenge investigators, researchers, and curious minds decades later. On August 20th, 1966, two men were discovered lying side by side near the top of the hill. They showed no obvious signs of violence or struggle. Their clothing appeared neat, and nearby investigators found several unusual objects: a waterproof coat, an empty water bottle, a small towel, and a handwritten note containing cryptic instructions. Most striking of all were the handmade lead masks resting over their eyes. The victims were identified as Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz, both electronic technicians from the Brazilian city of Campos dos Goytacazes. Friends and relatives described them as hard-working men with a strong interest in electronics and scientific experimentation. According to reports, they had left home days earlier, telling their families they needed to purchase equipment for work. Before departing, one of the men reportedly requested extra money, explaining that he intended to buy materials for an unspecified purpose. Witnesses later recalled seeing the pair in Niterói on the day of their disappearance. A waitress remembered serving them at a local restaurant where they appeared calm and behaved normally. Another witness claimed to have observed the men purchasing waterproof raincoats despite the warm weather. Nothing about their actions suggested fear or urgency, yet their destination remained unclear. The handwritten note found beside the bodies has fascinated investigators ever since. Its translated instructions were brief and enigmatic. 1630, be at the specified place. 1830, ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. Await signal. Mask. The meaning of these words has never been conclusively determined. What capsules? What signal? Why was it necessary to protect metals? And what purpose did the lead masks serve? The masks themselves were remarkably simple. Fashioned from sheets of lead, they resembled oversized eyeglasses without lenses, carefully shaped to cover only the eyes. They offered no protection for the rest of the face and contained no straps to secure them in place. Investigators later discovered that similar masks had occasionally been used by amateur experimenters observing intense flashes of light or solar phenomena, although there was no evidence connecting the victims to any officially recognized scientific activity on the hill. The investigation quickly encountered frustrating obstacles. Heavy rainfall before the bodies were discovered may have destroyed valuable evidence. Because no obvious injuries were visible, authorities initially delayed performing certain forensic examinations. By the time toxicological testing became possible, decomposition had advanced too far to determine whether poison or drugs had played a role. As a result, the exact cause of death has never been established. The absence of physical trauma encouraged numerous theories. Some researchers proposed accidental poisoning during an experiment involving chemical substances. Others suggested the capsules mentioned in the note may have contained hallucinogenic compounds intended to induce altered states of consciousness. During the 1960s, interest in spiritualism, psychic research, and attempts to communicate with unseen intelligences had gained popularity in parts of Brazil. Historical records indicate that both men had participated in groups exploring these subjects alongside their interest in electronics.
Could they have believed they were preparing for some form of extraordinary experience? If so, why travel to a remote hillside carrying lead masks and carefully written instructions? Another possibility focused on organized crime or fraud. Perhaps the men were deceived into participating in an experiment that ended tragically. Yet, investigators found no evidence of robbery, and valuable personal belongings remained untouched. Their money, watches, and identification were still present, making financial motives difficult to support. As years passed, more speculative explanations emerged. Some writers connected the case to unidentified aerial phenomena reported in the region during the same era. Witnesses in nearby communities had occasionally described unusual lights moving silently across the night sky. Enthusiasts wondered whether the mysterious signal referenced in the note referred to something arriving from above rather than from another person. The lead masks, in this interpretation, were imagined as protection against brilliant flashes or unknown radiation. Skeptics point out that no verifiable evidence links the deaths to anything beyond earthly circumstances. Unusual lights alone cannot explain the missing cause of death, the cryptic instructions, or the purpose behind every object found at the scene. At the same time, conventional explanations also leave significant gaps. Without toxicological confirmation, eyewitness certainty, or definitive forensic evidence, every theory rests upon incomplete information. More than half a century later, the hillside remains unchanged, its quiet paths concealing memories of an investigation that never reached a satisfying conclusion. The lead masks, simple pieces of shaped metal, continue to symbolize questions rather than answers. Were they tools for an experiment, instruments of ritual, protection against an anticipated event, or something whose purpose has yet to be understood? Perhaps the greatest mystery is not what happened on Vintem Hill that August evening, but how so many pieces of the story still refuse to fit together. If the lead masks case reminds us how a handful of unanswered questions can outlive generations, the next mystery suggests that secrets do not always remain hidden in remote places. Sometimes they are embedded in the pavement beneath thousands of unsuspecting footsteps, waiting for someone to pause, look down, and wonder who placed them there, and why. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary section of asphalt. Cars pass overhead without slowing. Rain washes across the street. Pedestrians rarely notice anything unusual. But then, almost hidden within the worn surface, a small rectangular plaque catches the eye. It is not made of metal, it is not part of the original road. Instead, it appears carefully embedded into the pavement itself, carrying a strange message in bold capital letters. Toynbee Idea in Movie, 2001 Resurrect Dead on Planet Jupiter. For decades, messages like this have appeared in streets across major cities in the United States and even parts of South America. They are commonly known as the Toynbee Tiles, and despite years of investigation, no one has definitively explained who created them, how they were installed without being noticed, or what message they were truly intended to convey. The earliest confirmed discoveries date to the early 1980s, although some researchers believe the phenomenon may have begun even earlier. Tiles have been documented in Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., Cleveland, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and several other cities. Similar examples have also been found far beyond the United States, including in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Their remarkable distribution immediately raises practical questions. Installing a tile into an active roadway is not a simple task. Most appear firmly bonded to the asphalt, often surviving years of traffic before gradually wearing away. Whoever placed them worked quietly, usually under the cover of darkness, avoiding attention while leaving behind messages that seem designed to provoke curiosity rather than advertise identity. The wording itself has inspired countless interpretations. The reference to historian Arnold Toynbee appears deliberate. Toynbee spent much of his career studying the rise and decline of civilizations, but no verified writings from him discuss resurrecting the dead on Jupiter. The tile also references Stanley Kubrick's film 2001, A Space Odyssey, a story exploring humanity's evolution, intelligence, and transformation beyond Earth. Yet, no scene in the film directly connects resurrection with the giant planet. Why combine these seemingly unrelated ideas? One mainstream interpretation suggests that the creator misunderstood or creatively combined philosophical concepts from Toynbee with themes presented in Kubrick's film. Rather than quoting either source directly, the tiles may represent an entirely personal belief system expressed through familiar cultural references. Investigators have noticed that many tiles include additional text, often mentioning media organizations, government agencies, or elaborate conspiracies. Some accuse newspapers or broadcasters of suppressing important discoveries. Others contain fragmented political statements, references to radiation, or warnings whose meanings remain frustratingly obscure. These variations suggest an evolving message rather than a single slogan repeated endlessly. Each tile feels like another page from a much larger document that only its creator could fully understand. As interest grew, amateur investigators began searching for clues. Several journalists devoted years to tracing the source. Patterns emerged suggesting that many tiles originated in or around Philadelphia. Witnesses occasionally reported seeing an older vehicle moving slowly through neighborhoods late at night, though descriptions varied and no consistent identification was ever confirmed. One investigation eventually pointed toward a Philadelphia resident believed by some researchers to have possessed both the technical skills and unusual philosophical interests reflected in the tiles. The evidence, however, remained largely circumstantial. No definitive confession, verified documentation, or conclusive forensic proof established that any single individual was responsible. Even the method of installation remains partly uncertain. Researchers examining damaged examples discovered that many tiles appear to have been constructed from layers of linoleum, roofing adhesive, and road sealant. According to one widely accepted theory, the creator assembled the tiles beforehand, placed them adhesive side down on warm pavement, and allowed passing traffic to press them permanently into the asphalt over time. It is an ingenious explanation, but it leaves another mystery unresolved. How could someone repeat this process across dozens of cities over many years without attracting widespread attention? Some speculate that multiple individuals participated, sharing techniques while preserving anonymity. Others believe the distribution reflects years of determined travel by a single person pursuing an intensely personal mission. Neither possibility has been conclusively demonstrated. Naturally, more speculative theories have also emerged. Some observers have wondered whether the tiles form part of an elaborate coded communication intended only for specific readers. Others suggest they represent an outsider art project stretching across an entire continent, where the mystery itself is inseparable from the artwork. A few have proposed that the repeated references to resurrection and Jupiter reflect deeply held metaphysical beliefs rather than literal predictions. Without knowing the creator's intentions, every interpretation remains incomplete. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Toynbee tiles is not their unusual message, but their persistence. Roads are resurfaced. Cities expand. Construction projects erase old pavement. Yet, every so often, another forgotten tile emerges beneath cracked asphalt, reminding passers-by that someone invested extraordinary effort simply to leave behind a question. Was the true purpose to persuade, to communicate, to challenge accepted ideas, or merely to ensure that curiosity would survive long after the creator disappeared? Decades after the first tiles appeared, that quiet message still waits beneath the wheels of passing traffic. inviting anyone who notices it to ask whether the greatest mysteries are hidden in distant places or lying unnoticed beneath our feet.
Just as the Toynbee Tiles transformed ordinary streets into enduring puzzles, the next mystery begins not with an object hidden beneath asphalt, but with a single word, typed in haste, seemingly without explanation. 14 letters would have been forgettable. 5 letters became unforgettable. On a quiet evening in Western Germany, the glow of a television flickered through the windows of an ordinary home. Nothing about the neighborhood suggested that it would soon become the center of one of Europe's most perplexing unsolved cases. Inside, daily routines unfolded as they always had. Yet somewhere in the house, a typewriter produced a sequence of letters that would puzzle investigators for decades. YOGTZE. The word appeared meaningless. It matched no known German word, no recognizable acronym, and no obvious abbreviation. At first glance, it looked like a random collection of letters, but the circumstances surrounding its discovery transformed it into something far more unsettling. The events unfolded on October 25, 1984. The central figure was 34-year-old Günther Stoll, a food engineer living in the town of Anshausen, near Siegen. Friends and family later described him as intelligent, thoughtful, and increasingly troubled in the months leading up to his death. According to those close to him, he had become convinced that unidentified individuals were following him or plotting against him. He rarely explained who they were, only insisting that unseen people intended to harm him. Whether these fears reflected a genuine threat, psychological distress, or something else entirely has never been determined. On the evening of his disappearance, Stoll was sitting at home when he reportedly exclaimed, "Now I've got it." He immediately walked to his typewriter and typed the mysterious sequence, YOGTZE. Some reports suggest the final character may have been the numeral 7 rather than the letter E, though the surviving accounts differ on this detail. Before anyone could ask what he meant, he crossed out the entry. Then he left. His movements over the next several hours remain only partially understood. He visited a local pub where, without any obvious cause, he suddenly fell to the floor. Witnesses later stated that he appeared neither intoxicated nor physically assaulted. After recovering, he left the establishment and continued his journey into the night. What happened afterward remains one of the greatest mysteries of the case. Hours later, shortly before dawn, 2 truck drivers traveling along the A45 Autobahn near Hagen encountered a badly damaged vehicle resting in a roadside ditch. Beside it, or according to some reports inside the vehicle, they found Günther Stoll, gravely injured but still alive. The scene immediately raised disturbing questions. Stoll was completely unclothed. Medical examination later determined that his injuries were consistent with being struck by a vehicle, yet investigators concluded they had not occurred during the crash involving his own car. Instead, evidence suggested he had already sustained severe injuries elsewhere before somehow ending up at the location where he was discovered. Despite his condition, Stoll reportedly managed to utter a few final words before losing consciousness. He claimed that 4 unknown men had been with him. He offered no names, no descriptions, and no explanation of who they were or what had happened. He died soon afterward. The investigation that followed uncovered remarkably few answers. Police searched for evidence of another accident scene but found nothing conclusive. No witnesses came forward to identify the alleged 4 men. No clear motive emerged. Friends, co-workers, and relatives struggled to explain Stoll's increasingly fearful behavior, while investigators attempted to distinguish verifiable facts from speculation. The cryptic word remained at the center of every discussion. What did YOGTZE mean? Linguists, code enthusiasts, amateur investigators, and professional detectives have all proposed interpretations. Some have suggested it may have been an anagram or an unfinished word interrupted before completion. Others noticed similarities to vehicle registration codes, industrial abbreviations, or technical terminology connected to Stoll's engineering background. None of these possibilities has been verified. One frequently discussed theory proposes that Stoll was attempting to write JOGTZE, or another incomplete sequence connected to a memory or location. Another suggests the letters may have represented initials understood only by their author. Because the original note was crossed out almost immediately, some wonder whether Stoll recognized an error before leaving home, or whether he intended the sequence as a private reminder rather than a message for others. The uncertainty surrounding his mental state has also shaped interpretations of the case.
Some investigators believe his fears of persecution may indicate an untreated psychiatric condition, causing him to perceive threats where none existed. Others caution that dismissing his concerns entirely risks overlooking the possibility that he genuinely encountered dangerous individuals. The absence of evidence proving either explanation leaves the case suspended between psychology and criminal investigation. Then there is the question of the final hours themselves. Why was he traveling so far from home? Why was he found without clothing? If another vehicle caused his fatal injuries, where did the collision occur? If 4 men were involved, why has no reliable trace of them ever surfaced? Every confirmed fact seems accompanied by another unanswered question. Decades have passed since that October night, yet the YOGTZE case continues to resist resolution. The typewritten word remains preserved in police records, frozen in time as though it were the opening line of a message whose ending was never written. Was it a code, a coincidence, a desperate clue, or simply the product of a mind struggling to express something no one else could understand? Until new evidence emerges, those 5 enigmatic letters continue to invite the same quiet question they have inspired for generations. What was Gunther Stoll trying to tell the world before he disappeared into the darkness? As the YOGTZE case demonstrates, a single, unexplained word can keep an investigation alive for decades. Sometimes, however, the mystery is not a message left behind, but an entire identity that seems to vanish without a trace. Our next story leads into the mist-covered mountains of Norway, where one unknown woman became the center of a mystery that has never truly faded. Just outside the city of Bergen, steep, forested slopes rise toward rocky peaks where narrow trails wind through pine trees and scattered valleys. The air is often cool, carrying moisture from the nearby fjords. Clouds drift low across the mountainside, softening the landscape into shades of gray and green. It is a place of remarkable beauty, but also one capable of hiding secrets. One secluded valley, known as Isdalen, or the Ice Valley, has long carried an unsettling reputation. Local residents have associated it with fatal accidents and unexplained tragedies for generations. Yet, on a cold autumn afternoon in 1970, the valley became known for something even more disturbing. On November 29th, a father and his 2 young daughters were hiking through the rugged terrain when they noticed a strange smell lingering in the air. Following it through the rocks and brush, they came upon the burned remains of a woman lying among the stones. Norwegian authorities quickly arrived at the remote location. The scene was unlike an ordinary accident. The woman's body had been severely burned, yet investigators found several unusual objects nearby. Scattered around her were melted plastic bottles, a partially burned umbrella, fragments of clothing, rubber boots, jewelry, and what appeared to be personal belongings damaged by intense heat. Curiously, many identifying labels had been carefully removed from her clothing. Almost immediately, investigators recognized that whoever this woman had been, she had gone to considerable lengths, or someone had gone to considerable lengths, to conceal her identity. The autopsy revealed further mysteries. The woman had died from a combination of burns and carbon monoxide poisoning. Toxicological analysis also detected a significant quantity of sleeping pills in her stomach. Whether the medication had been voluntarily consumed, administered by another person, or played a decisive role in her death has remained the subject of debate ever since. There were no documents identifying her, no passport, no driver's license, no obvious clues revealing where she came from. As police expanded their investigation, they discovered suitcases stored at Bergen railway station that appeared to belong to the unidentified woman. Inside, investigators found clothing, wigs, cosmetics, prescription glasses without fingerprints, maps, currency from several countries, and notebooks filled with what looked like coded travel records. Once again, nearly every clothing label had been removed. The notebooks proved especially intriguing. Rather than ordinary diary entries, they contained combinations of letters and numbers corresponding to dates and locations. After careful analysis, investigators concluded they likely documented an extensive series of journeys through Europe under different identities. Hotel records soon confirmed an extraordinary pattern. Over several months, the woman had traveled throughout Norway while using numerous aliases. Witnesses described her as elegant, well-dressed, and fluent in multiple languages. Depending on the location, she claimed different nationalities and occupations. Sometimes she spoke German. At other times, she appeared equally comfortable using French or English. Hotel staff later recalled that she often requested rooms overlooking entrances or streets, changed accommodations frequently, and occasionally appeared cautious about being observed. Who was she really? One straightforward explanation suggested that she was simply attempting to conceal a private life involving personal relationships, financial difficulties, or criminal activity unrelated to international espionage. Frequent travel under assumed names, while unusual, does not automatically indicate intelligence work. Yet, several details encouraged broader speculation. The investigation unfolded during the height of the Cold War, when Northern Europe occupied an important strategic position between NATO members and the Soviet Union. Bergen itself hosted naval facilities and military activity of considerable interest to foreign intelligence agencies. Some researchers therefore wondered whether the unidentified traveler had been involved in espionage. The multiple passports reported by witnesses, coded notebooks, changing identities, and deliberate removal of identifying labels appeared consistent with methods occasionally associated with intelligence operations of that era. However, despite decades of discussion, no government has publicly confirmed any connection between the Isdal Woman and espionage. Other theories have pointed toward organized smuggling networks, confidential diplomatic work, or even witness protection under circumstances that later unraveled. Each possibility explains certain details while leaving others unresolved. Modern forensic science has added new pieces to the puzzle without fully solving it. Advances in isotope analysis suggested that the woman may have spent her childhood in parts of Central Europe before traveling extensively later in life. DNA analysis has provided investigators with valuable information, yet no definitive identification has emerged despite international cooperation and renewed public appeals. In recent years, journalists and independent researchers have revisited the evidence, interviewing surviving witnesses and re-examining forgotten documents. Some remembered seeing the woman accompanied by unidentified men shortly before her death. Others recalled conversations that hinted she feared being followed. Like many eyewitness accounts collected long after the event, these recollections are difficult to verify, but they continue to shape public fascination. The valley itself has remained unchanged. Visitors walking its quiet trails today encounter only rocks, trees, and the sound of wind moving through the mountains. Nothing immediately reveals that this peaceful landscape once became the final known destination of a woman whose true name may never be known. More than half a century later, the Isdal Woman remains both a person and a mystery. She crossed borders, assumed identities, left behind coded notes, and disappeared into history without anyone conclusively answering the most fundamental question of all. Was she an ordinary traveler living an extraordinarily secretive life? an intelligence operative caught in invisible conflicts, or someone whose real story has yet to be uncovered. Somewhere within forgotten archives, fading memories, or evidence still waiting to be recognized, the answer may still exist, quietly hidden, like the mist that continues to settle over Norway's Ice Valley.
The story of the Isdal Woman leaves us with the haunting image of an unknown traveler whose identity disappeared into history. Yet some mysteries do not center on an unnamed person at all. Instead, they begin with something far simpler, a series of marks pressed into the ground. Sometimes, it is not who made them that unsettles us most, but the unsettling possibility that no explanation seems to fit every detail. In the rolling countryside of Devon, England, winter has a way of transforming the familiar into something almost otherworldly. Quiet villages rest beneath gray skies, stone cottages overlook narrow lanes, and fields stretch toward distant hills divided by ancient hedgerows. On rare occasions, heavy snowfall blankets the landscape, smoothing every path and rooftop into an untouched sheet of white. In such conditions, even the smallest disturbance becomes impossible to ignore. On the morning of February 9th, 1855, residents awoke to a sight unlike anything they had seen before. Crossing the fresh snow was a single line of peculiar footprints. The impressions appeared hoof-like, each measuring roughly 4 inches in length and spaced with surprising regularity. Unlike the tracks left by familiar farm animals, they seemed to form a nearly perfect single-file trail, as though whatever had made them had walked with extraordinary precision. At first, the prints might have seemed little more than an odd curiosity. But as news spread from village to village, the scale of the phenomenon became increasingly difficult to comprehend. Reports suggested the trail extended across dozens of miles through Devon, passing over fields, roads, gardens, and rooftops. Witnesses claimed the tracks crossed frozen rivers without interruption, continued over walls several feet high, and appeared on both sides of enclosed courtyards where no obvious point of entry existed. Some accounts even described footprints leading directly toward haystacks before abruptly continuing on the opposite side without disturbing the snow in between. The further the stories traveled, the more extraordinary they became. Local newspapers quickly seized upon the mystery. One report estimated that the tracks stretched as far as 100 miles, although modern historians note that this figure likely combined numerous separate sightings into a single continuous narrative. Even so, contemporary newspaper accounts confirm that unusual footprints were observed across a remarkably wide area, leaving many residents genuinely puzzled. The timing only deepened public unease. Victorian England remained deeply influenced by folklore, religious belief, and rural traditions. For many villagers, unfamiliar hoof-shaped prints appearing overnight naturally evoked stories passed down through generations. Rumors spread that the devil himself had wandered across the countryside during the night, leaving unmistakable evidence of his passage. Thus, the name "the Devil's Footprints" entered local history. Fear spread quickly. Some people reportedly avoided traveling before sunrise. Others inspected their homes for signs that the mysterious visitor had approached their doors. Conversations in churches, markets, and inns revolved around a single unsettling question: what had crossed the snow while everyone slept? Authorities and naturalists attempted to calm growing speculation by offering more conventional explanations. One possibility involved ordinary animals whose tracks had been altered by changing weather conditions. As snow melts and refreezes, footprints can widen, distort, and merge into unusual shapes. Rabbits, for example, often hop with their hind feet landing ahead of their front feet, occasionally creating impressions that appear strangely regular after partial melting. Could a combination of snowfall, thawing temperatures, and freezing overnight have transformed ordinary tracks into something extraordinary? Another explanation focused on small mammals such as badgers, otters, or rodents traveling unusual routes in search of food. Different species moving across rooftops, walls, and narrow ledges might collectively account for reports that seemed impossible when viewed as a single continuous trail. Yet these theories encounter familiar difficulties. Eyewitnesses consistently described the footprints as unusually uniform. Many insisted they followed uninterrupted paths across obstacles where known animals would likely have changed direction or left more varied impressions. Although memory can become unreliable, especially when influenced by rumor, the remarkable consistency of certain descriptions has kept debate alive.
More unusual proposals emerged over time. Some 19th century writers speculated that escaped exotic animals, including kangaroos, might have produced unfamiliar tracks. Others suggested large birds hopping across snow-covered ground. One particularly imaginative theory proposed that experimental balloons dragging loose ropes could have created intermittent marks beneath changing winds, though this explanation has struggled to account for the distinct hoof-like shape reported by many observers. As decades passed, increasingly speculative interpretations appeared. Paranormal researchers pointed to long-standing European folklore, describing supernatural beings whose presence was marked by unusual footprints. Others connected the event to unexplained atmospheric phenomena or cryptids said to inhabit isolated landscapes. A few even suggested that the scattered reports represented encounters with something entirely unknown, an idea impossible to confirm, yet difficult for some enthusiasts to dismiss completely. Historians, however, urge caution. Many surviving accounts were recorded after rumors had already spread throughout Devon, making it difficult to separate first-hand observation from stories influenced by growing public fascination. Some reports undoubtedly became exaggerated through repeated retelling. Even so, enough independent newspaper articles and witness statements exist to confirm that an unusual event genuinely captured widespread attention during the winter of 1855. Today, the snow has long since melted, and the original footprints have disappeared forever. Only written records, newspaper archives, and generations of retold stories remain. Yet, perhaps, that is what makes the mystery endure. Physical evidence vanished within days, while the questions outlived everyone who first witnessed them. Were the devil's footprints simply an extraordinary combination of weather, wildlife, and human imagination? Did multiple unrelated tracks become woven into a single, unforgettable legend? Or did the people of Devon witness something that still resists ordinary explanation? More than a century and a half later, those silent impressions continue to lead into the distance, ending not with answers, but with fresh snow waiting to be crossed once again. The devil's footprints remind us that sometimes a mystery begins with something that appears briefly, leaving behind only questions before fading away. Our next story takes that idea even further. Instead of mysterious tracks disappearing from the snow, it is an entire island that seems to have vanished from the map. Far out in the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, the horizon stretches endlessly in every direction. The sea changes with the light, shifting from deep blue to shimmering silver beneath the afternoon sun. Apart from the occasional ship or seabird, the landscape appears almost empty. Yet, for centuries, sailors believed that somewhere within these waters stood a small island known as Bermeja. Today, no one can say with certainty whether it ever existed at all. For hundreds of years, Bermeja appeared on maps created by respected European cartographers. The island was typically shown northwest of the Yucatan Peninsula, marked as a modest landmass surrounded by open sea. Its name, meaning reddish in Spanish, may have referred to the color of its rocks or soil, although no verified first-hand description survives to confirm this. The earliest known references date back to the 16th century. Spanish maps from the colonial era included Bermeja with surprising consistency, and later cartographers continued copying the island onto their own charts. During an age when navigation relied heavily on accumulated geographic knowledge, once an island entered respected maps, it often remained there for generations. Yet, something curious happened. As navigation improved and scientific surveying became more precise, sailors began encountering a problem. They could not find Bermeja. Expeditions searched the reported location without success. Ships crossed the surrounding waters repeatedly, expecting to glimpse land rising above the horizon, but nothing appeared. The sea remained open and uninterrupted. Initially, this absence did not erase the island from official maps. Cartographers often relied on earlier sources, assuming that previous explorers had accurately recorded locations. Minor errors in longitude were common before the widespread use of precise marine chronometers, so some believed Bermeja simply lay elsewhere than originally estimated. Could generations of navigators have searched in the wrong place? As decades passed, however, the mystery deepened. By the late 20th century, Bermeja had become more than a geographical curiosity. Its possible existence carried important political and economic implications. Under international maritime law, islands can influence the boundaries of exclusive economic zones, affecting rights over fisheries, shipping routes, and valuable underwater natural resources. If Bermeja truly existed in the location shown on historical maps, it could potentially alter maritime claims in parts of the Gulf of Mexico. The stakes suddenly became much higher. During the 1990s, Mexico sponsored scientific expeditions to determine once and for all whether the island remained above sea level. Using modern navigation systems, sonar equipment, satellite positioning, and detailed oceanographic surveys, researchers carefully examined the area where Bermeja was expected to stand. They found nothing. No island. No submerged remains clearly identifiable as former land. No obvious geological structure matching centuries of cartographic records. The conclusion seemed straightforward. Whatever Bermeja had been, or had been believed to be, it could no longer be located. Yet, this finding raised an even larger question. How could an island appear consistently on maps for hundreds of years without existing? The simplest explanation is that Bermeja resulted from early cartographic error. During the age of exploration, navigators often faced poor weather, inaccurate instruments, shifting currents, and limited methods for determining exact positions. A mistaken sighting, duplicated by later mapmakers who trusted earlier charts, could have preserved a non-existent island for centuries. History contains other examples of so-called phantom islands that occupied maps long before being removed after careful surveys. Another possibility is that Bermeja did once exist, but gradually disappeared through natural processes. Coastal islands can erode under constant wave action, hurricanes, changing sea levels, and geological instability. Sandbars emerge and vanish over surprisingly short periods, while low-lying islands may become submerged following powerful storms or long-term environmental change. Some geologists, however, note that no conclusive underwater evidence has been found demonstrating that a substantial island once occupied the reported location. Without such evidence, this explanation remains uncertain. Naturally, more speculative theories have also emerged. One enduring claim suggests that Bermeja was deliberately destroyed to influence maritime boundaries and access to offshore oil reserves. According to this theory, the island's disappearance was not accidental but intentional. Despite its popularity in books, documentaries, and online discussions, no credible evidence has ever substantiated this allegation. Scientific surveys have not uncovered signs of artificial destruction, and historians generally regard the claim as unsupported by verifiable documentation. Other writers have wondered whether volcanic or tectonic activity could have caused a small island to sink beneath the sea. While geological change certainly reshapes coastlines over long periods, no confirmed event matching Bermeja's disappearance has been identified. Even satellite imagery, capable of revealing remarkable detail across the Earth's surface, has failed to settle every question surrounding the island's history. Researchers continue examining old navigation logs, colonial archives, and historical maps, searching for overlooked clues that might explain why so many respected cartographers depicted the same mysterious landmass. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether Bermeja exists today, but why so many intelligent observers believed it existed in the first place. Across centuries, its outline appeared in atlases, navigational charts, and official documents, quietly shaping humanity's understanding of the Gulf of Mexico before slipping away from both maps and reality. Was Bermeja merely one of history's most persistent cartographic mistakes? Did nature erase the final traces of a forgotten island long before modern science arrived? Or is some missing piece of the story still waiting within weathered archives or beneath the quiet waters where explorers continue to search for land that no longer answers when called? The mystery of Bermeja reminds us that not every enigma disappears beneath the sea. Some are hidden in plain sight, etched across landscapes so vast that they remain invisible to anyone standing nearby. Our next mystery shifts from vanished islands to the immense Australian outback, where one of the largest artworks ever created appeared without warning and without a known creator. Far from Australia's crowded coastlines, the interior stretches toward the horizon in every direction. The land is dry and ancient, colored by deep reds and warm ochres shaped over millions of years. Sparse vegetation breaks the endless plains, while shimmering heat distorts the distance beneath an immense blue sky. From the ground, the outback can seem almost empty. Yet, viewed from high above, the desert occasionally reveals patterns that no traveler could ever recognize while standing within them. One such pattern emerged unexpectedly in 1998. Near the small settlement of Marree in South Australia, a pilot flying over the desert noticed something astonishing carved into the earth below. Cut into the reddish surface was the enormous outline of a human figure holding what appeared to be a throwing stick or hunting tool. The figure was unlike anything previously documented in the region. Measuring approximately 4.2 kilometers in length, the geoglyph was so immense that it could only be fully appreciated from the air. Its lines, some more than 30 meters wide, had been scraped into the desert using heavy equipment, exposing lighter-colored earth beneath the darker surface. The precision of its proportions suggested careful planning rather than spontaneous creation. It soon became known as the Marree Man. The discovery immediately raised practical questions. Creating an image of such extraordinary scale would have required surveying equipment, detailed measurements, machinery capable of carving long, uninterrupted lines, and access to one of the most remote regions in Australia. The operation would almost certainly have taken considerable time. How had such a project escaped notice? Investigators estimated that bulldozers or graders were likely used to remove the upper layer of soil. Tire tracks were eventually identified, but they revealed remarkably little about who operated the machinery or when the work had begun. Given the vastness of the surrounding landscape and the limited number of visitors passing through the area, it remained entirely possible for significant activity to occur without attracting immediate attention. The figure itself also invited interpretation. Many observers noted similarities between the Marree Man and depictions of Aboriginal hunters carrying a woomera, a traditional spear-throwing device used by several Aboriginal Australian communities. However, no Indigenous group publicly claimed responsibility for creating the geoglyph, nor did traditional oral histories identify it as an ancient cultural site. This distinction proved important. Unlike the famous geoglyphs of Peru, whose origins stretch back centuries, the Marree Man was clearly modern. The sharp edges of the carving, combined with the absence of historical references before 1998, left little doubt that someone had created it in recent times. The question was simply, who? Early in the investigation, anonymous communications added another layer to the mystery. Media organizations received fax messages containing references to the geoglyph, along with quotations from literature and measurements apparently connected to the figure's location. One package included an American flag and excerpts discussing Aboriginal culture, though no sender identified themselves. These messages offered hints without providing confirmation. Over the years, several individuals have been proposed as possible creators. One of the most frequently discussed names is Bardius Goldberg, an Australian artist known for ambitious projects and unconventional ideas. Some acquaintances later suggested he had privately expressed interest in creating a giant desert artwork before his death. Yet no definitive evidence has emerged proving his involvement, and the claim remains unverified. Others have proposed that surveyors, military personnel, mining workers, or local residents collaborated on the project as an elaborate artistic statement or practical joke. The technical expertise required certainly makes such possibilities plausible. However, despite decades of speculation, no participant has publicly provided conclusive proof of authorship. Naturally, more imaginative theories followed. Some suggested the geoglyph represented a coded message visible only from the sky. Others wondered whether it marked an unknown archaeological site or commemorated an event never officially recorded. A few even speculated about connections to unidentified aerial phenomena, arguing that the figure's enormous scale implied it was intended for observers above rather than people on the ground. There is, however, no credible evidence supporting these more extraordinary claims. The desert itself has also become part of the story. Unlike monuments built from stone, the Marree Man exists within an ever-changing landscape. Wind gradually softens the carved lines. Rain, though infrequent, slowly reshapes the exposed earth. At times, the figure faded enough that many believed it would eventually disappear altogether. Yet, in recent years, local efforts have helped preserve its outline by retracing sections of the original design using modern surveying techniques. The geoglyph remains visible once again from the air, allowing new generations to witness the mystery much as pilots first saw it in 1998. Even today, standing on the ground near the carving reveals almost nothing unusual. Only from thousands of feet above does the immense hunter emerge from the desert, silently stretching across the landscape with remarkable precision. Perhaps that perspective offers the greatest lesson of the Marree Man. Some mysteries cannot be understood from where we naturally stand. They require distance, patience, and a willingness to see familiar places from entirely different angles. More than 2 decades after its discovery, the identity of the artist, or artists, remains uncertain. Was the Marree Man an ambitious work of land art, a cultural tribute, a private message intended for unknown viewers, or something whose true purpose has never been revealed? Across the vast silence of the Australian outback, the giant figure continues to watch the horizon, waiting for someone who already knows why it was placed there. The Marree Man reminds us that some mysteries are visible only from above, their true scale revealed through distance and perspective. Our next story, however, takes us into mountains where visibility itself can disappear within moments. Here, the mystery is not something carved into the landscape, but a tragedy that unfolded within it, leaving behind a sequence of events that still resists complete explanation. The Khamar-Daban mountain range stretches across southern Siberia, where dense forests climb toward rugged ridgelines overlooking the vast waters of Lake Baikal. Even in summer, the weather can change with startling speed. Sunshine may give way to cold rain within minutes, while thick fog rolls silently across the slopes, reducing visibility to only a few meters. It is a landscape of remarkable beauty, but one that demands respect from anyone who enters it. In August 1993, a group of experienced hikers set out to cross part of this remote mountain range. The expedition consisted of 7 people led by 41-year-old Lyudmila Korovina, a highly respected hiking instructor known for her experience in wilderness survival. Her group included 6 young hikers who had trained extensively under her guidance. None of them were inexperienced adventurers. They carried proper equipment, understood mountain travel, and had successfully completed demanding expeditions before. Nothing suggested that this journey would become one of Russia's most unsettling wilderness mysteries. On August 5th, after several days of trekking, the group reached an exposed area near a mountain pass. According to the only surviving member, 17-year-old Valentina Utochenko, the weather had deteriorated dramatically. Strong winds swept across the ridge, accompanied by cold rain that soaked clothing and equipment. Then, something extraordinary happened. Without warning, one member of the group reportedly collapsed. According to Valentina's later testimony, the hiker began bleeding from the mouth and ears before falling to the ground. Moments later, another member displayed signs of extreme panic, removing clothing despite the freezing conditions and running aimlessly across the mountainside. Within minutes, the orderly expedition descended into chaos. One after another, members of the group reportedly experienced alarming symptoms. Some screamed incoherently. Others staggered as though disoriented or unable to control their movements. Several collapsed without recovering. The sequence unfolded so rapidly that even Korovina, the experienced leader, was unable to restore order before she too collapsed. Valentina suddenly found herself completely alone. Faced with an unimaginable situation, she remained near the group for a short time before making the difficult decision to descend the mountain in search of help. She later described navigating through harsh weather, surviving on berries, and following rivers through unfamiliar terrain for several days until she eventually encountered other people. By the time rescuers reached the campsite, all 6 remaining members of the expedition had died. The official investigation sought to determine what had happened. Autopsies concluded that the victims died primarily from hypothermia. Some reports also mentioned signs consistent with pulmonary edema, a condition in which fluid accumulates within the lungs. However, the precise sequence of events leading to the hiker's sudden collapse remained unclear. The reported bleeding from the ears and mouth attracted particular attention. Some medical experts have questioned whether later retellings exaggerated or misinterpreted these observations. Official documentation available to the public does not always contain identical descriptions, leaving uncertainty about exactly which symptoms were medically confirmed and which emerged through subsequent accounts. Even setting aside those details, the behavior described by the survivor remains deeply unusual. Why would experienced hikers suddenly remove clothing during freezing weather? One possible explanation involves paradoxical undressing, a rare phenomenon occasionally observed during severe hypothermia. As the body's temperature regulation fails, victims may experience an overwhelming sensation of heat despite dangerously low core temperatures, leading them to remove protective clothing. This explanation accounts for some reported behavior, but does it explain everything? Another hypothesis focuses on environmental exposure. Rapid weather changes, exhaustion, dehydration, and prolonged cold can combine to impair judgment, coordination, and decision-making. High winds and freezing rain may have accelerated heat loss far faster than anticipated, leaving the group physically and mentally compromised within a short period. Some researchers have also considered high-altitude illnesses, although the elevations involved in the Khamar-Daban range are generally lower than those most commonly associated with severe altitude-related conditions. Naturally, more speculative ideas soon emerged. Because of similarities involving remote mountains, unexplained deaths, and limited surviving evidence, comparisons were frequently drawn to the better-known Dyatlov Pass incident. Some writers proposed military testing, exposure to unknown airborne substances, infrasound generated by unusual wind conditions, or naturally occurring toxic gases released from the landscape. None of these theories has been supported by conclusive evidence. Others suggested that psychological contagion played a role. In extreme survival situations, fear and confusion can spread rapidly through groups, especially when one member suddenly becomes critically ill. Combined with severe environmental stress, panic itself may have intensified an already dangerous situation. Yet, important questions remain unanswered. Why did symptoms appear so suddenly? Why did an experienced leader fail to regain control of the group? And why did only one person survive while everyone else perished within such a short period? Valentina's testimony remains the central account of what occurred on that mountain. As with any recollection formed during profound trauma, investigators have carefully weighed its value while recognizing the challenges inherent in reconstructing rapidly unfolding events under extreme conditions. Today, the Khamar-Daban Mountains remain as they always have, windswept, isolated, and indifferent to human understanding. Hikers continue to cross the same ridges, guided by maps and experience, aware that nature sometimes presents dangers that reveal themselves only when it is already too late. More than 3 decades later, the Khamar-Daban Incident occupies a space between documented tragedy and enduring mystery. The official findings explain part of the story, yet not every detail fits comfortably within a single narrative. Was this an exceptionally rare combination of environmental factors, an unfortunate cascade of medical emergencies, or does some overlooked piece of evidence still lie hidden among the peaks where the silence has never fully surrendered its secrets? The Khamar-Daban Incident reminds us that nature can sometimes produce events so bewildering that even careful investigation leaves unanswered questions. Yet, not every mystery unfolds in remote mountains or isolated wilderness. Occasionally, something extraordinary seems to descend into the ordinary rhythms of daily life, transforming a quiet afternoon into an event that people remember for generations. The rolling farmland of Bath County, Kentucky, is defined by open pastures, wooden fences, and gently rising hills. In the late 19th century, the landscape was one of peaceful routine. Families tended livestock, cultivated crops, and relied on the predictable rhythm of the seasons. The sky above these fields was familiar, watched closely for signs of rain or changing weather. On March 3, 1876, however, the sky appeared to deliver something no one could have anticipated. Near the small community of Olympia Springs, a farmer's wife named Mrs. Allen Crouch was reportedly making soap in her yard when she noticed small objects falling from above. At first, they seemed almost like snowflakes drifting through the air, but as they reached the ground, it became immediately clear that they were something entirely different: pieces of flesh. According to newspaper accounts from the time, fragments of what appeared to be raw meat descended over an area estimated at roughly 100 yards across. Witnesses described the pieces as varying in size, with some no larger than flakes while others measured several inches in length. The event quickly became known as the Kentucky Meat Shower. News spread rapidly across the region. Curious neighbors gathered to inspect the strange material scattered across fields and fences. In an era before modern forensic laboratories, examination often depended upon observation, personal judgment, and the opinions of local physicians. Remarkably, some witnesses reportedly handled, and even tasted, the mysterious substance in an effort to determine what it might be. Such actions seem extraordinary by modern standards, but 19th century scientific curiosity often unfolded quite differently than it would today. The earliest descriptions varied considerably. Some observers believed the material resembled beef. Others suggested lamb, venison, or pork. The inconsistency immediately complicated efforts to identify its origin. Samples were eventually examined by several scientists. One of the earliest analyses proposed that the material consisted primarily of lung tissue, possibly belonging to a horse or an infant. Another investigator reached a different conclusion, suggesting the specimens were a mixture of muscle tissue, cartilage, and connective material from multiple animals. These conflicting findings have remained part of the mystery ever since. Part of the difficulty lies in the limitations of 19th century science. Microscopic examination was available, but techniques for biological identification were far less precise than those used today. Without modern DNA analysis or advanced laboratory methods, experts often reached different conclusions while studying the same material. Even if the tissue could be identified with certainty, another question remained. How had it fallen from the sky? One of the earliest natural explanations focused on large birds. Certain species of vultures possess a defensive behavior in which they regurgitate partially digested food when startled or threatened. By rapidly emptying their stomachs, they become lighter and better able to escape danger. If a flock of vultures had simultaneously released recently consumed animal tissue while flying overhead, scattered fragments might have fallen across a relatively confined area. To many modern researchers, this remains the most widely accepted explanation. Yet, it is not without challenges. No one reported observing a flock of vultures directly above the property at the precise moment the material began falling. Moreover, some contemporary descriptions suggested that the pieces appeared to descend gradually over several minutes, though eyewitness recollections varied and were recorded after considerable excitement had already spread. Could a passing flock simply have gone unnoticed? Some ornithologists argue that this is entirely possible. Large, soaring birds can travel at significant altitude, making them difficult to detect, particularly if witnesses were focused on the strange material already reaching the ground. Other explanations proved considerably more imaginative. Some 19th century newspapers speculated about unusual atmospheric phenomena capable of lifting organic matter into the air before depositing it elsewhere. Others wondered whether violent storms occurring many miles away might somehow have transported animal remains across great distances.
Modern meteorology offers little support for such scenarios, particularly given the relatively localized distribution of the material. As often happens with unexplained events, more speculative ideas eventually emerged. Some writers suggested extraterrestrial origins, unknown biological phenomena, or mysterious atmospheric anomalies unlike anything recognized by conventional science. Others proposed that the event represented an elaborate hoax, although no credible evidence has ever demonstrated how such a deception could have been organized or why anyone would undertake it. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the Kentucky meat shower is not that unusual material fell from the sky, but that multiple witnesses independently reported the same extraordinary occurrence. Local newspapers, scientific journals, and later historical accounts all preserve descriptions of an event that genuinely appears to have taken place, even if its precise cause remains uncertain. Today, the quiet fields of Bath County give little indication that they once hosted one of America's most unusual natural mysteries. Seasons continue to pass across the same farmland, and the skies overhead appear no different from those watched by the Crouch family nearly a century and a half ago. Whether the Kentucky meat shower resulted from an uncommon but entirely natural behavior among scavenging birds, an unusual combination of environmental circumstances, or something still not fully understood, it occupies a curious place in history. It reminds us that even the familiar sky can occasionally present events that challenge expectation. Sometimes the greatest mysteries do not emerge from distant ruins or isolated mountains, but descend unexpectedly into ordinary places, leaving behind evidence that invites investigation long after the last fragment has disappeared.
The Kentucky meat shower reminds us that not every mystery arrives with a warning. Sometimes, the extraordinary interrupts an ordinary day without explanation, leaving witnesses to question what they believed they had seen. Our next story follows a similar path, except this time the mystery did not seem to fall from the sky. Instead, it appeared to emerge from the past itself. Just outside Paris, the Palace of Versailles stands as one of Europe's most celebrated historic landmarks. Grand avenues stretch toward ornate gardens designed with remarkable precision. Marble statues overlook quiet fountains, while carefully trimmed hedges create geometric pathways that seem almost timeless. Every year, countless visitors wander these grounds, hoping to experience a place where history feels unusually close. Most leave with photographs and memories. 2 visitors, however, left believing they had briefly stepped into another century. The year was 1901. Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain were respected British academics, serving as educators with reputations for intelligence and careful observation. During a visit to France on August 10th, they decided to explore the gardens surrounding the Petit Trianon, a smaller chateau closely associated with Queen Marie Antoinette. Neither woman expected anything unusual. As they wandered away from the more familiar tourist routes, they later recalled experiencing an unexpected sense of confusion. The pathways seemed unfamiliar despite carrying maps. Ordinary sounds gradually faded, replaced by an unusual stillness that both women would later describe in strikingly similar terms. Then they noticed the people. According to their later accounts, several individuals appeared to be dressed in clothing unlike contemporary fashion. Some wore long coats and tricorn-style hats more commonly associated with the 18th century. Others seemed occupied with quiet activities that appeared strangely detached from the modern world surrounding Versailles. The atmosphere itself felt different. Rather than describing fear, both women wrote of an overwhelming sensation that the landscape had somehow become unnaturally still. Colors appeared muted. The air seemed heavy. They later struggled to explain this impression, noting only that everything around them felt subtly altered, as though reality itself had shifted. One encounter became particularly famous. Near the gardens of the Petit Trianon, Moberly reported seeing a woman seated on a small stool, apparently sketching. The figure wore pale clothing and a broad hat. Years later, after studying historical portraits, Moberly became convinced that the woman resembled Marie Antoinette. Whether this was an actual historical figure, an ordinary visitor, or simply a later interpretation remains one of the central questions surrounding the incident. Eventually, the unsettling atmosphere lifted. The women found themselves once again among ordinary visitors, modern voices returned, and the strange impressions faded almost as suddenly as they had begun. At the time, neither fully discussed the experience with the other, believing it too unusual to describe. Only later, after independently comparing memories, did they realize how many details their recollections appeared to share. Convinced that something extraordinary had occurred, Moberly and Jourdain spent years researching the history of Versailles. In 1911, they published their account under the pseudonyms Elizabeth Morrison and Frances Lamont in a book titled An Adventure. The book attracted immediate attention. Some readers viewed the account as compelling evidence of what later became known as a time slip, a rare phenomenon in which individuals allegedly experience brief moments during which the past and present somehow overlap. Others remained deeply skeptical. Historians examining the women's descriptions identified several inconsistencies. Certain buildings they described may not have existed exactly as remembered during the 18th century. Some clothing details appeared to combine fashions from different historical periods. Researchers also noted that memories can evolve over time, especially when shaped by years of historical investigation. This raises an important possibility. Could later research have unintentionally influenced the women's original recollections? Psychologists have long observed that memory is not a perfect recording of events. Instead, it is reconstructed whenever recalled, making it possible for genuine experiences to become subtly altered through discussion, reading, and reflection. Another explanation focuses on simple misunderstanding. Versailles occasionally hosted historical events, private gatherings, and artistic activities that included period costumes. Some historians have suggested that Moberly and Jourdain may have inadvertently encountered participants in such an event, later interpreting unfamiliar scenes through the lens of memory and imagination. However, no documented historical reenactment matching the precise date and location has been conclusively identified. Other researchers have proposed that the women experienced a shared psychological episode brought about by fatigue, unfamiliar surroundings, or expectation. Navigating the extensive gardens in summer heat may have contributed to temporary confusion, while later conversations reinforced particular details remembered by both participants. Then, there are the more speculative interpretations. Supporters of paranormal explanations argue that the consistency between certain aspects of the two accounts is difficult to dismiss entirely. They suggest the women may have briefly perceived echoes of the past preserved within a location deeply connected to history and emotion. Others describe the experience as a form of residual haunting, where moments from another era are somehow replayed without interaction. These ideas remain firmly outside mainstream scientific understanding, yet they continue to fascinate those interested in unexplained phenomena. More than a century has passed since Moberly and Jourdain walked the gardens of Versailles. Millions of visitors have explored the same pathways without reporting comparable experiences, while a handful of later witnesses have claimed moments of unusual disorientation or historical impressions of their own. Whether these accounts represent coincidence, suggestion, or something less easily explained remains uncertain. Today, the pathways around the Petit Trianon appear peaceful beneath carefully maintained trees. Visitors stroll through the same gardens carrying cameras instead of sketchbooks, surrounded by the sounds of modern tourism. Yet the landscape still possesses an unusual ability to evoke the past. History lingers there with remarkable strength, inviting every traveler to imagine lives once lived within those carefully designed grounds. Did Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain simply misinterpret an unusual afternoon shaped by memory and expectation? Did they unknowingly encounter an elaborate scene whose context has since been forgotten? Or, for one brief moment in the summer of 1901, did they step across a boundary that normally separates the present from another time? The gardens offer no answers. They remain quiet, beautiful, and perhaps still capable of holding moments that refuse to stay entirely within history. The Moberly-Jourdain incident invites us to consider the possibility that some mysteries blur the boundaries between past and present. Our next story shifts from the quiet gardens of Versailles to the cold waters of the Atlantic, where dozens of witnesses reported seeing something fall from the sky, not into history, but into the sea. What followed remains one of the most carefully documented and enduring unexplained incidents in Canadian history. Along the southern coast of Nova Scotia, the Atlantic Ocean stretches endlessly beneath changing skies. Fishing boats rise and fall with the tide, while rocky shorelines meet the restless sea that has shaped generations of coastal communities. The village of Shag Harbour is small and peaceful, its harbor protected from the open ocean by rugged headlands. On calm evenings, the water reflects the fading light with remarkable clarity. But on one October night in 1967, that familiar horizon became the stage for an event that no one could fully explain. It was the evening of October 4th. Shortly after sunset, several residents noticed a series of bright lights moving silently across the darkening sky. Witnesses described 4 glowing orange lights arranged in a roughly rectangular pattern. The object appeared to travel at a low altitude before descending toward the ocean. At first, many assumed they were watching an aircraft in distress. Drivers stopped along nearby roads. Families stepped outside their homes. Fishermen looked toward the coastline as the lights continued moving over the water. Then, according to numerous witnesses, the object struck the surface of the harbor. Observers reported seeing a flash followed by what appeared to be a floating area of yellowish foam illuminated by intermittent lights beneath or just above the water. Believing that an airplane had crashed offshore, local residents immediately contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The response was swift. Police officers arrived within minutes, joined by members of the Canadian Coast Guard and local volunteers. Rescue boats headed toward the location where the object had reportedly entered the sea. Given the number of eyewitnesses and the apparent location of the impact, authorities fully expected to recover wreckage, or perhaps survivors. Instead, they found only an unusual patch of floating foam, no aircraft debris, no fuel slick consistent with a conventional crash, no bodies. The search continued through the night. The Canadian military also became involved, and underwater searches were conducted in the days that followed. Records confirmed that both civilian and military authorities treated the event seriously, operating under the assumption that an unidentified aircraft had entered the water. Yet, no missing aircraft matched the incident. Air traffic authorities confirmed that no civilian, military, or commercial flights had disappeared in the area that evening. Nearby airports reported no overdue aircraft. International inquiries likewise failed to identify any known plane capable of accounting for the sightings. The absence of wreckage quickly transformed a presumed rescue mission into a genuine mystery. Official documents referred to the object as a UFO, an unidentified flying object, not because investigators concluded it was extraterrestrial, but because its identity remained unknown after conventional explanations had been exhausted. This distinction is often overlooked. In aviation terminology, unidentified simply means that investigators cannot determine the object's nature based on available evidence. Nevertheless, speculation soon expanded beyond ordinary possibilities. One straightforward explanation suggested that witnesses had mistaken a meteor for a crashing aircraft. Bright fireballs occasionally enter Earth's atmosphere, creating dramatic visual displays before disappearing into the ocean. However, astronomers noted that meteors typically leave no floating foam or lingering lights on the water. Furthermore, the reported movement appeared slower and more controlled than most meteor observations. Another possibility involved secret military activity. Given the Cold War setting of the late 1960s, some researchers have wondered whether the object could have been an experimental aircraft or classified technology. Military testing over the Atlantic was not unheard of during this period. Yet, no publicly available records have confirmed such an operation near Shag Harbour on the night in question. As years passed, more elaborate accounts emerged. Some witnesses and later investigators claimed that naval vessels tracked an unidentified object moving underwater after the initial impact. According to these reports, the object traveled toward another location before eventually disappearing. Others suggested that a second unidentified object may have rendezvoused with the first beneath the surface. These claims remain controversial. While certain military documents confirm search operations took place, the more dramatic underwater pursuit has proven difficult to verify conclusively through official records. The eyewitness testimony itself remains one of the strongest aspects of the case. Unlike many unexplained sightings involving only one or two observers, the Shag Harbour incident was witnessed by multiple independent individuals from different locations. Police officers, local residents, fishermen, and emergency responders all described an unusual aerial object entering the water. Even today, investigators continue examining archived documents, witness interviews, and declassified government files in hopes of reconstructing every detail. No single explanation has achieved universal acceptance. Some researchers remain convinced that an unconventional natural phenomenon can account for the observations. Others believe classified human technology offers a more plausible solution. And for those interested in unidentified aerial phenomena, Shag Harbour occupies a unique place because of the seriousness with which authorities initially approached the event. The harbour itself has long since returned to its familiar rhythm. Fishing boats still leave before dawn. Waves continue breaking gently against the shoreline. Visitors standing along the coast today would see little to suggest that one autumn evening transformed this quiet village into the center of an international mystery. Perhaps that is what makes the Shag Harbour incident so compelling. It is not a story built upon rumor alone, but one supported by official investigations that ultimately arrived at the same conclusion expressed in the simplest possible terms. The object could not be identified. More than half a century later, the Atlantic keeps its silence. Whatever entered those dark waters on October 4, 1967, has never been recovered, leaving only eyewitness memories, unanswered reports, and the enduring question of what may still lie hidden beneath the waves. The Shag Harbour incident leaves us staring into dark water, wondering whether the greatest mysteries disappear beneath the surface or simply remain beyond our understanding. Our next story begins not in the ocean, but in the soil beneath an ordinary family home. Sometimes, the smallest discoveries can cast the longest shadows. The market town of Hexham in Northumberland, England, is a place where history seems woven into the landscape. Roman roads once crossed the surrounding countryside. Medieval churches still dominate the skyline, and centuries-old stone buildings stand alongside quiet residential streets. Layers of the past lie hidden beneath gardens, fields, and foundations, waiting for chance to bring them back into the light. In 1971, one such chance discovery would give rise to one of Britain's most unusual modern mysteries. It began during routine work outside a family home. Two young brothers, Colin and Leslie Robson, were digging in the garden when they uncovered two small stone objects buried beneath the earth. At first glance, they appeared to be little more than oddly shaped rocks. After brushing away the soil, however, their unusual appearance became clear. Each object had been carved into the rough likeness of a human head. The larger measured only a few inches high, while the smaller fit comfortably in the palm of a hand. Both displayed exaggerated facial features, with deeply cut eyes, broad noses, and mouths that gave them an oddly expressive appearance. Their weathered surfaces suggested considerable age, although no one could immediately determine when or why they had been created. The boys brought the heads inside. What might have remained an interesting archaeological curiosity soon became the center of increasingly strange reports. According to members of the Robson family, unusual events began occurring after the discovery. Household objects were said to move without explanation. Strange sounds were reportedly heard during the night. One account described doors opening unexpectedly, while another claimed that furniture seemed to shift position. Perhaps the most memorable stories involved the family's children. The boys allegedly reported seeing a large creature resembling a wolf wandering through the house or appearing outside their bedroom window. The descriptions varied, but the figure was generally portrayed as tall, dark, and unsettling rather than openly threatening. No physical evidence ever confirmed these sightings. Nevertheless, the stories quickly spread beyond the household, attracting the attention of local newspapers and researchers interested in folklore and paranormal claims. The stone heads themselves also drew considerable interest. Several archaeologists examined the objects in an attempt to determine their origin. Early suggestions proposed that they might date to the Iron Age or the Romano-British period, perhaps connected with ancient Celtic traditions in northern Britain. Stone carvings of human faces are known from various archaeological contexts, and ritual significance has often been associated with the human head in ancient European cultures. However, closer examination complicated that interpretation. Some experts argued that the carvings showed signs of relatively recent workmanship rather than great antiquity. Others questioned whether the style matched known examples from the Roman or Celtic periods. Without a documented archaeological context or reliable dating methods applied directly to the carvings, determining their true age proved remarkably difficult. Were they ancient artifacts, or modern creations mistakenly believed to be much older? The uncertainty surrounding their origin encouraged increasingly imaginative theories. Some writers connected the heads to ancient Celtic beliefs that regarded the human head as the seat of spiritual power. Throughout parts of Iron Age Europe, carved heads appear in religious and ceremonial contexts, leading some researchers to speculate that the Hexham Heads may once have served a ritual purpose. Others suggested they represented protective figures intended to guard homes or sacred places. As paranormal interest grew during the 1970s, another interpretation gained popularity. According to this view, disturbing the buried heads may have awakened whatever symbolic or supernatural force they represented. The reported disturbances within the Robson household were interpreted by some enthusiasts as evidence that the objects possessed unusual properties. Skeptics offered a different perspective. They noted that once stories of mysterious artifacts began circulating, heightened expectation could easily influence perception. Ordinary household noises, vivid dreams, and childhood imagination might gradually become woven into a larger narrative through repeated discussion and media attention. Psychologists have long observed that belief can shape interpretation, particularly when unusual discoveries already carry an atmosphere of mystery. Even so, one question remained. If the heads were simply recent carvings, who created them, and why were they buried beneath the garden? The mystery deepened further after the artifacts changed hands. At various points, the heads were reportedly examined by researchers and eventually disappeared from public view. Their precise current whereabouts have never been firmly established in publicly available records. Without access to the original objects, opportunities for modern scientific analysis have become extremely limited. This absence has only strengthened their reputation. Today, much of what survives consists of photographs, witness accounts, newspaper articles, and conflicting recollections recorded decades after the events themselves. As with many enduring mysteries, the physical evidence has become almost as elusive as the explanations. The garden where the heads were discovered has long since returned to ordinary life. Seasons have passed over the same patch of earth, and little remains to suggest that two small stone carvings once transformed an ordinary family into the focus of national curiosity. Yet the questions remain remarkably persistent. Were the Hexham Heads misunderstood archaeological artifacts whose true history has been lost? Did coincidence, expectation, and folklore combine to create a modern legend? Or did the strange reports preserve fragments of an older tradition whose meaning has faded with time? Whatever the answer may be, the silent faces continue to gaze from old photographs, offering no explanation, only the quiet invitation to wonder what stories may still lie buried beneath the ground, waiting for someone to uncover them once again. The Hexham Heads remind us that even the smallest objects can gather stories that grow larger with every passing year. Our next mystery leaves buried artifacts behind and enters the quiet streets of a coastal town, where the mystery was not hidden underground, but seemed to arrive silently in the middle of the night, leaving behind no footprints, no witnesses, and only a few missing strands of hair. Along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, the city of Pascagoula has long been shaped by the rhythms of the sea. Fishing boats drift through calm waters before sunrise, humid air settles over quiet neighborhoods, and warm evenings invite families to leave their windows open to catch the breeze. During the spring of 1942, however, that peaceful routine was interrupted by a series of strange reports unlike anything the town had experienced before. Residents began waking to an unsettling discovery. Small sections of their hair had been carefully cut away while they slept. The incidents appeared random at first. Victims reported no memory of anyone entering their homes. Doors often showed no signs of forced entry, valuables remained untouched, and no obvious motive could be identified. Yet locks that had seemed secure the night before now felt strangely inadequate. The local newspapers quickly gave the unknown intruder a memorable name: the Phantom Barber. One of the earliest widely reported incidents involved two young sisters who awoke to find locks of their hair neatly removed. Their family insisted that the girls had gone to bed with normal hairstyles and discovered the missing hair only the following morning. Physicians examined the children but found no evidence that they had been injured during the night. Soon, similar reports began appearing across Pascagoula. Not every account was identical. In some cases, adults claimed that patches of hair had disappeared. Others described children whose braids or curls had been partially cut. The amount of hair removed varied considerably, but the central mystery remained the same. How could someone enter occupied homes, approach sleeping people closely enough to cut their hair, and leave without waking anyone? As word spread, fear quietly settled over the community. Families double-checked windows before bedtime. Neighbors organized informal night watches. Some residents stayed awake into the early hours, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious barber should he attempt another visit. Yet, despite heightened vigilance, no intruder was ever reliably observed. Police launched an investigation. Officers interviewed victims, inspected homes, and searched for common patterns. They considered whether the incidents might be connected by a single individual, or whether unrelated events had become linked through growing public attention. The evidence proved frustratingly limited. No fingerprints clearly identified a suspect. No footprints consistently appeared outside the homes. No stolen property suggested burglary as the motive. Hair alone seemed to be the target. As anxiety increased, local authorities eventually arrested a man believed to have been acting suspiciously in the area. Reports from the time describe him as a chemist employed at a nearby shipyard. Investigators suspected he might have been responsible for the strange nighttime visits. However, the case quickly weakened. No physical evidence connected him to the haircutting incidents, and he consistently denied involvement. The charges were ultimately dismissed, and the investigation returned to where it had begun, with no confirmed suspect. The mystery only deepened. One practical explanation suggests that at least some reports resulted from misunderstanding or coincidence. Hair can become tangled, broken, or uneven for many ordinary reasons, particularly among children. Once newspaper coverage expanded, heightened awareness may have encouraged people to notice irregularities they might otherwise have ignored. Psychologists refer to this as social contagion, a process in which widespread publicity influences perception and interpretation without requiring deliberate deception. Could fear itself have transformed isolated events into what appeared to be a coordinated series? Others point to the possibility of an unidentified prankster. If a single individual truly entered homes, selecting victims at random while removing small amounts of hair, the behavior would have required remarkable stealth. Yet, history contains examples of intruders whose motives seemed irrational or deeply personal, making such a scenario difficult to dismiss entirely. Even so, significant questions remain. Why was nothing else taken? Why were there no reliable eyewitnesses? And how could repeated entries into occupied homes leave behind so little evidence? As with many unusual cases, more speculative ideas eventually emerged. Some writers connected the incidents to folklore involving mysterious nocturnal visitors said to collect personal items for unknown purposes. Others suggested hypnotic states, unexplained sleep phenomena, or even paranormal entities capable of entering homes unnoticed. These interpretations remain unsupported by verifiable evidence, but they continue to circulate because conventional explanations leave certain details unresolved. The timing of the events has also attracted attention. The incidents occurred during 1942, a period marked by wartime uncertainty throughout the United States. Communities along the Gulf Coast lived with heightened anxiety, blackout drills, and constant concern about unseen threats. Historians have suggested that this atmosphere may have amplified rumors, encouraging isolated reports to become part of a larger mystery that seemed increasingly difficult to explain. Whether that context fully accounts for the events remains uncertain. Today, Pascagoula is better known for its shipbuilding industry and peaceful waterfront than for the strange episodes that briefly unsettled the town more than 80 years ago. The homes where the incidents reportedly occurred have changed hands. Neighborhoods have grown, and the people who first experienced those unsettling mornings are now part of history. Yet, the Phantom Barber has never been conclusively identified. No confession has been universally accepted, no definitive evidence has emerged, and no explanation has answered every question raised by those quiet spring nights. Was the mystery born from an elusive intruder, shaped by wartime tension and rumor, or inspired by something far more difficult to define? Somewhere between documented police reports and fading local memory, the answer may still linger, like a whisper carried through an open window after midnight, noticed only when the morning light reveals that something small, yet undeniably strange, has been left behind. The Phantom Barber of Pascagoula reminds us that some mysteries begin with something so subtle, a few missing strands of hair, that they quietly unsettle an entire community. Our next story follows a different kind of intrusion. Nothing was stolen, no doors appeared forced, yet anonymous messages began arriving with unsettling precision, turning an ordinary town into the center of one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries. Circleville, Ohio, is the kind of town where familiar faces outnumber strangers. Quiet streets connect neighborhoods where generations of families have lived side by side. Front porches overlook tree-lined roads, local schools serve as gathering places, and daily routines often unfold with comforting predictability. In communities like this, privacy carries a special meaning. People know one another's names, habits, and histories. That familiarity became the foundation of an unsettling mystery. In the late 1970s, residents began receiving anonymous letters. The envelopes bore no return address. Inside were carefully handwritten messages accusing recipients of hidden affairs, personal secrets, and private misconduct. The writer displayed an unsettling familiarity with intimate details that appeared known only to close friends, relatives, or the individuals themselves. Whoever authored the letters seemed to be watching. One of the earliest known targets was Mary Gillespie, a local school bus driver. The anonymous writer repeatedly accused her of maintaining a secret relationship with the district superintendent, Gurdon Light. The letters demanded that the alleged affair end immediately and warned of consequences if the accusations were ignored. At first, the family chose not to respond. Mary and her husband, Ron Gillespie, reportedly hoped the messages would eventually stop. Instead, they multiplied. Soon, other residents also began receiving similar correspondence. The writer appeared to possess detailed knowledge of personal lives throughout Circleville, expanding the mystery beyond a single household. Then, the situation took a tragic turn. In August 1977, Ron Gillespie received a telephone call believed to have been connected to the anonymous letters. Shortly afterward, he left home carrying a handgun. He never returned. Authorities later discovered that Ron had died after his pickup truck crashed into a tree. The official investigation concluded that the collision resulted from an accident. However, some circumstances surrounding his final movements encouraged speculation among family members and local residents. Why had he left so suddenly? Who had called him that evening? And had the anonymous letters somehow played a role? No definitive evidence answered those questions. The mystery deepened several years later. In 1983, while driving her school bus, Mary noticed a homemade sign positioned along her route. It contained another threatening message referencing the same allegations that had appeared in previous letters. Determined to remove it, she stopped the bus and approached the sign. Attached behind it was a small box. Inside, investigators later found a handgun rigged in what appeared to be a crude booby trap. Authorities concluded that the firearm had been positioned so that disturbing the sign could potentially trigger it. Fortunately, the device did not discharge. The discovery transformed the investigation from a campaign of anonymous harassment into something considerably more serious. Attention eventually focused on a local resident named Paul Freshour, Mary's former brother-in-law. Investigators argued that handwriting samples resembled the anonymous letters. Freshour denied writing them and maintained his innocence throughout the investigation. Nevertheless, he was convicted of attempting to harm Mary using the roadside trap and sentenced to prison. Many believed the mystery had finally been solved. Then another unexpected development occurred. Even while Freshour remained incarcerated, additional anonymous letters reportedly continued arriving in Circleville. Recipients claimed the handwriting remained strikingly similar to earlier messages. Some letters even appeared to reference Freshour's imprisonment directly, suggesting that the writer remained active despite his incarceration. This complicated the case considerably. Supporters of Freshour argued that the continued correspondence demonstrated he could not have been responsible for the entire campaign. Others suggested that more than one individual may have participated from the beginning, perhaps sharing information or imitating the original author's style. Investigators examined numerous possibilities. Could someone have copied the handwriting after gaining access to earlier letters? Might the continuing messages have been isolated hoaxes inspired by widespread publicity? Or had authorities focused on the wrong suspect altogether? The volume of correspondence added another layer of complexity. Over the years, hundreds of letters reportedly circulated among residents, public officials, schools, and local institutions. Many contained personal accusations, while others focused on seemingly unrelated grievances. Some information proved accurate. Other claims appeared exaggerated, misleading, or impossible to verify. Separating fact from rumor gradually became as difficult as identifying the writer. Handwriting experts reached differing conclusions regarding authorship. As often happens in forensic document analysis, opinions varied depending upon the methods employed and the available comparison samples. No universally accepted determination resolved the matter beyond dispute. Naturally, alternative theories emerged. Some researchers believe a single exceptionally observant individual orchestrated the campaign for years, exploiting local gossip to create the illusion of omniscience. Others argue that multiple writers independently contributed to the letters, each adding new accusations as the mystery expanded. More speculative interpretations suggest the anonymous messages reflected hidden conflicts within the community that extended far beyond any one individual. According to this view, the letters became a mirror revealing tensions already present beneath Circleville's quiet surface. Whether that interpretation explains the facts remains uncertain. Today, many of the original letters have become historical documents, preserved as evidence in a case that continues to fascinate investigators and researchers alike. The identities of many recipients remain known only through archived records, while the handwriting itself has become one of the most recognizable features of the mystery. Circleville continues its ordinary routines much as it did before the first envelope arrived. Streets remain quiet. Schools welcome new generations of students. Yet, the memory of those anonymous messages still lingers in local history, reminding residents how quickly certainty can dissolve when trust gives way to suspicion. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not simply who wrote the Circleville letters, but how one unseen voice managed to reshape an entire community through nothing more than ink, paper, and secrets that may, or may not, have been true. Decades later, the envelopes have yellowed with age, but the identity behind the handwriting remains hidden, waiting somewhere beyond the final unopened letter.
The Circleville letters remind us that some mysteries arrive quietly, carried by ordinary envelopes that conceal extraordinary questions. Our next case also begins with an ordinary journey, but instead of words on paper, the mystery appears as a brilliant light in the night sky, followed by claims of physical consequences that continue to fuel debate decades later. On quiet winter evenings in the piney woods of southeastern Texas, long stretches of rural highway wind through dense forests of pine and oak. The roads are often empty after sunset, illuminated only by passing headlights and the occasional glow of distant farmhouses. Away from the cities, the darkness feels almost complete, making even a single bright light impossible to ignore. On the night of December 29, 1980, 3 people were traveling along one such road near the small town of New Caney. Their journey should have been uneventful. The passengers were Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Vicki's 7-year-old grandson, Colby Landrum. As they drove through the quiet countryside, they noticed an unusually bright object hovering above the trees ahead of them. At first, it resembled a distant light. As they approached, however, the object appeared far larger than expected. According to their later accounts, it was diamond-shaped, intensely luminous, and surrounded by flames or a brilliant fiery glow extending downward. Witnesses described the object as producing extraordinary heat, so intense that Betty Cash reportedly stopped the vehicle because she feared it might ignite. When she briefly stepped outside, she later claimed the heat became almost unbearable. The metal surface of the car allegedly felt hot to the touch. Vicki Landrum, remaining inside with her grandson, reportedly urged Betty to return to the vehicle before continuing down the road. Then the event became even more unusual. The witnesses stated that numerous helicopters appeared overhead. Descriptions varied somewhat over time, but Betty and Vicki consistently estimated that many military-style helicopters surrounded or accompanied the glowing object as it slowly moved across the sky. Some accounts suggested more than 20 helicopters participated, although the precise number remains uncertain. The convoy eventually disappeared into the distance. For most unusual sightings, the story might have ended there. Instead, the witnesses claimed that serious health problems developed shortly afterward. Betty Cash reported severe headaches, nausea, painful skin irritation, and extensive blistering. She later stated that clumps of her hair began falling out and that she required hospitalization. Vicky Landrum also described illness, though generally less severe, while young Colby reportedly experienced temporary symptoms including nausea. These medical claims transformed the incident into something far more complex than an ordinary unidentified aerial sighting. Could exposure to intense heat or radiation explain the reported illnesses? Medical records confirm that Betty Cash sought treatment for significant health problems following the event. However, determining whether those conditions resulted directly from the reported encounter has proven far more difficult. The witnesses themselves became convinced that the object had exposed them to dangerous radiation. This belief shaped much of the investigation that followed. Because the helicopters reportedly appeared military in appearance, Betty Cash and Vicky Landrum pursued legal action against the United States government. They argued that some branch of the military must have been operating an experimental aircraft whose emissions caused their injuries. Federal investigators examined the claims. Officials from multiple military branches searched flight records, operational logs, and aircraft inventories in an effort to identify helicopters matching the descriptions provided. According to publicly available records, no evidence emerged confirming that military aircraft were conducting operations in the area consistent with the witnesses' accounts. The lawsuit was ultimately dismissed, not because the court concluded the witnesses fabricated their experience, but because no evidence established that the United States government owned or operated the unidentified object or the helicopters allegedly accompanying it. The absence of official confirmation only deepened the mystery. One possible explanation proposes that the witnesses encountered an experimental aircraft developed under classified programs. During the Cold War, advanced aviation projects occasionally remained secret for years before becoming public knowledge. If such technology existed, proponents argue, official records might not necessarily have been available.
Skeptics counter that coordinating numerous helicopters around a highly unusual aircraft without leaving verifiable documentation would have been extraordinarily difficult. Another possibility focuses on misidentification. Bright celestial objects, atmospheric conditions, industrial flares, or conventional aircraft observed under unusual circumstances can occasionally appear far more extraordinary than they actually are. Yet, this explanation struggles to account for the witnesses' detailed descriptions of extreme heat and their subsequent medical complaints. Some researchers have suggested that the health effects may have resulted from unrelated medical conditions that coincidentally emerged after the sighting. Others argue that psychological stress following an emotionally overwhelming event can contribute to genuine physical symptoms without requiring exposure to an external hazard. Neither interpretation fully satisfies every aspect of the case. Naturally, more speculative theories have also endured. Some investigators interested in unidentified aerial phenomena regard the Cash-Landrum Incident as one of the strongest cases involving alleged physical effects associated with an unexplained object. They point to the consistency of the witnesses' testimony, reported injuries, and the claimed presence of multiple helicopters as features distinguishing the event from more conventional sightings. Critics respond that extraordinary claims require equally extraordinary evidence, and that no physical material, photographs, radar data, or independently verified military records have confirmed the encounter. More than 4 decades have passed since that winter night. The rural highway remains much as it was in 1980. Cars continue traveling beneath dark Texas skies where stars still outnumber streetlights. To passing motorists, the road offers little indication that it once became the setting for one of the most debated, unidentified aerial encounters in American history. Whether the Cash-Landrum Incident resulted from a misunderstood natural phenomenon, an undisclosed human technology, or something that remains beyond present explanation, it continues to occupy a unique place among modern mysteries because it combines eyewitness testimony with claims of lasting physical consequences. Somewhere between documented medical records, unanswered official inquiries, and memories of an intensely glowing object suspended over a lonely road, the full story may still be waiting to emerge, if it has not already vanished into the darkness from which it first appeared. The Cash-Landrum Incident reminds us that some mysteries appear beneath the open sky, witnessed only for a few fleeting moments before disappearing without explanation. Our next story leaves lonely highways behind and enters living rooms instead, where an ordinary television broadcast was suddenly interrupted by something so bizarre that, decades later, no one has publicly claimed responsibility. Before the internet connected millions of people instantly, television held a different kind of power. Evening broadcasts brought news, entertainment, and live events directly into homes, creating shared moments experienced by entire cities at once. Viewers trusted that what appeared on their screens came from carefully controlled studios and transmission towers. Interrupting a television signal was considered nearly impossible, requiring technical knowledge, specialized equipment, and precise timing. On the evening of November 22, 1987, that certainty was unexpectedly challenged. In Chicago, sports fans were watching the local evening news on station WGN-TV when the picture suddenly distorted. For a few moments, the regular broadcast disappeared, replaced by the image of an unidentified individual wearing a rubber mask resembling the fictional television character Max Headroom. The interruption lasted only about 25 seconds. There was no clear explanation. The figure stood before a moving sheet of corrugated metal that created the illusion of the digital background often associated with the Max Headroom character. The masked individual swayed awkwardly while fragments of distorted audio played over the hijacked signal. The station's engineers quickly regained control of the transmission, and the broadcast resumed. At first, many viewers assumed it had been a technical malfunction. It was not. Later that same night, something even stranger occurred. During a broadcast of Doctor Who on Chicago public television station WTTW, the signal was interrupted again. This time, the unauthorized transmission lasted approximately 90 seconds, far longer than the first incident. The mysterious performer returned. Wearing the same Max Headroom mask and sunglasses, the individual delivered a stream of fragmented, often nonsensical remarks. Some comments appeared to reference local television personalities. Others consisted of disconnected jokes, unusual sounds, and cryptic phrases whose meaning remains uncertain. Toward the end of the broadcast, another unseen person briefly entered the frame. The closing moments became even more surreal, featuring behavior that many viewers found confusing rather than frightening. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pirate signal vanished, and the regular television program returned. Across Chicago, viewers were left wondering what they had just witnessed. Television stations immediately recognized the seriousness of the intrusion. Unlike ordinary prank calls or broadcast interruptions caused by equipment failure, this event represented an unauthorized takeover of licensed transmission signals. Such interference violated federal communications law and demonstrated technical capabilities possessed by very few individuals. The Federal Communications Commission, commonly known as the FCC, launched an investigation alongside other authorities. The challenge was considerable. At the time, analog television broadcasts relied upon microwave relay systems linking studios with transmission towers. To override an active signal, an intruder would likely have needed powerful transmitting equipment, careful planning, and a location positioned advantageously relative to the station's microwave receivers. This was not something easily accomplished by accident. Investigators concluded that the perpetrators possessed at least a sophisticated understanding of broadcast technology. Yet, despite extensive efforts, no one was ever publicly identified or charged. The mystery only grew with time. The masked performer's choice of disguise has inspired years of discussion. Mac's Headroom, originally introduced during the mid-1980s, represented a computer-generated television personality known for stuttering speech, satirical humor, and futuristic style. By adopting this image, the intruder immediately invoked a recognizable cultural icon while concealing his own identity. Was the mask chosen simply for comedy, or did it carry a deeper symbolic meaning? Some researchers believe the entire incident was an elaborate act of performance art, intended to expose the vulnerability of trusted media systems. The seemingly random dialogue, strange visual presentation, and refusal to explain the prank may all have been deliberate artistic choices designed to provoke curiosity rather than communicate a coherent message. Others argue that the broadcast reflected local satire. Several remarks appeared directed toward Chicago television figures and regional advertising, suggesting that the perpetrators possessed detailed familiarity with the city's media landscape. If true, the intrusion may have been intended primarily for local audiences who understood the references. Another possibility focuses on technical experimentation. Some enthusiasts have suggested that skilled electronics hobbyists simply wanted to prove that such a takeover could be accomplished. The bizarre content itself, according to this view, mattered less than the successful demonstration of technical ability. Naturally, more speculative interpretations have emerged over the decades. Some have wondered whether hidden messages or coded communications were embedded within the broadcast. Others have suggested connections to underground groups interested in media manipulation or anti-establishment activism. Careful analysis, however, has uncovered no verifiable evidence supporting these ideas. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies not in the content of the interruption, but in its execution. How many people participated? Where was the transmission equipment located? And how did everyone involved remain silent for so many years? In an age when many elaborate pranks are eventually explained through interviews, documentaries, or online confessions, the Mac's Headroom broadcast signal intrusion remains unusually resistant to resolution. No universally accepted confession has surfaced. No definitive technical reconstruction has identified the operators, and no official announcement has revealed the individuals responsible. Today, recordings of the hijacked broadcasts continue to circulate, studied by communications experts, media historians, and curious viewers alike. What once appeared briefly on television has become part of broadcasting history, not because of what was said, but because no one can fully explain who said it, how they accomplished it, or why they chose that particular moment to interrupt the ordinary flow of everyday life. More than 3 decades later, the static has long since faded, analog television has largely disappeared, and the technology that made the intrusion possible has become obsolete. Yet, the masked figure still smiles silently from archived recordings, frozen in time between comedy and mystery. Whether it was an extraordinary technical prank, an artistic statement, or something whose true purpose has never been revealed, the unanswered signal continues to echo through broadcasting history, reminding us that sometimes the most unsettling interruptions are the ones that arrive without warning and leave without ever identifying themselves. The Mac's Headroom broadcast signal intrusion reminds us that mysteries are not always buried in ancient ruins or hidden deep within remote landscapes. Sometimes they appear briefly through the familiar glow of a television screen, leaving behind more questions than answers. Our next story returns to something far older, a silent stone whose surface has challenged historians, archaeologists, and explorers for centuries. Along the banks of the Taunton River in Massachusetts, the tide rises and falls with quiet persistence, shaping the shoreline as it has for thousands of years. Salt marshes stretch toward the horizon, while weathered trees lean gently over calm water. Hidden within this peaceful landscape stands a massive boulder, unlike any other in the region. Its surface is covered with mysterious carvings that have resisted clear interpretation for generations. This is Dighton Rock. Weighing approximately 40 tons, the boulder is composed of hard gray sandstone, its broad face bearing an intricate collection of symbols, lines, geometric shapes, and figures carved into the stone. Time has softened many of the markings. Centuries of flowing water, changing tides, erosion, and natural weathering have gradually blurred their edges, making each symbol increasingly difficult to distinguish. Even today, no one can state with certainty exactly what the carvings represent. European settlers first documented the rock during the 17th century, although the carvings themselves are undoubtedly much older than those earliest written descriptions. By the late 1600s, scholars and travelers had already begun copying the inscriptions by hand, hoping to preserve details before erosion erased them forever. Those early sketches became the beginning of an enduring mystery. At first glance, the carvings appear almost chaotic. Some resemble human figures with raised arms. Others look like animals, boats, circles, grids, or abstract geometric designs. Certain lines intersect in ways that suggest writing, while nearby markings seem entirely symbolic. The more closely researchers examine the rock, the less obvious its meaning becomes. Who created these carvings, and for whom were they intended? The earliest and most widely accepted explanation attributes the inscriptions to the indigenous peoples of the region, particularly ancestors of the Wampanoag Nation. Archaeologists note that rock carvings known as petroglyphs appear throughout North America and often carried ceremonial, territorial, historical, or spiritual significance. Within this interpretation, Dighton Rock represents an important example of indigenous artistic expression, although the precise meaning of its symbols has likely been lost over time. This view is supported by many modern researchers, yet it has not prevented alternative theories from flourishing. Beginning in the 18th century, some scholars proposed that the carvings had been created by entirely different civilizations. One theory suggested that Norse explorers reached New England centuries before Christopher Columbus and left inscriptions commemorating their arrival. Supporters pointed to shapes they believed resembled runic writing, arguing that the carvings reflected Scandinavian language and symbolism. No consensus supporting this interpretation has emerged among specialists in Norse archaeology or linguistics. Others looked even farther south. Portuguese scholars proposed that the markings recorded the voyage of Miguel Corte Real, a 16th-century explorer who disappeared while searching the North Atlantic. According to this hypothesis, Dighton Rock served as a permanent record of his expedition. Again, the evidence has remained inconclusive. Over the years, additional theories expanded the mystery even further. Some researchers suggested connections to ancient Phoenician sailors, arguing that Mediterranean civilizations may have crossed the Atlantic long before commonly accepted timelines of exploration. Others proposed Chinese navigators, Celtic travelers, or even visitors from long-forgotten civilizations whose histories survive only through scattered clues. These ideas have captured public imagination for generations. However, mainstream archaeology has found no convincing evidence demonstrating that any of these proposed visitors carved the inscriptions on Dighton Rock. Part of the difficulty lies with the carvings themselves. The weathered surface allows observers to perceive different patterns depending upon lighting conditions, viewing angles, and expectations. A line interpreted as a letter by one researcher may appear as part of a human figure to another. What resembles a ship under one analysis may simply be the result of natural fractures combined with unrelated carvings. In this sense, Dighton Rock becomes almost like a visual puzzle. The observer's expectations can influence what they believe they see. Modern technology has offered new opportunities to study the inscriptions. High-resolution photography, three-dimensional laser scanning, and digital imaging techniques have revealed details invisible to earlier generations of researchers. These methods have improved documentation significantly, yet they have not produced a universally accepted interpretation. The symbols continue to resist translation. Today, Dighton Rock is preserved inside a protective museum structure near its original location, shielding it from further weathering while allowing visitors to examine its remarkable surface up close. Standing before the stone, it is easy to understand why it has inspired centuries of debate. Every groove appears intentional, every figure hints at meaning, yet the complete story remains frustratingly beyond reach. Perhaps that uncertainty is precisely what gives the rock its enduring power. Unlike written languages that can eventually be translated, these carvings occupy a space between art, history, memory, and symbolism. They invite interpretation while refusing certainty. Each generation returns with new technology, new theories, and new questions, only to discover that the stone remains as quiet as ever. Was Dighton Rock carved entirely by the indigenous peoples whose ancestors knew these rivers long before European arrival? Do later interpretations simply reflect humanity's tendency to search for familiar patterns within ambiguity? Or does the weathered sandstone still preserve fragments of a forgotten chapter whose meaning has yet to be recognized? As the Taunton River continues flowing past its ancient shoreline, the silent carvings remain unchanged, waiting patiently for someone who may one day understand the language they have been speaking all along. The Dighton Rock reminds us that some mysteries endure because they remain silent. Their secrets are carved into stone, waiting for someone who may never come. Our next case presents the opposite challenge. Instead of an ancient puzzle preserved for centuries, it unfolded in real time, witnessed by an entire community as something unusual appeared to fall from the sky. Soft, translucent, and impossible to identify with certainty. Nestled among the forests and rolling hills of southwestern Washington, the small town of Oakville is accustomed to rain. Moist Pacific air drifts inland throughout much of the year, covering roads, rooftops, and fields with a familiar gray mist. Residents rarely pay much attention to another rainy morning. But during the summer of 1994, the clouds seemed to deliver something that no forecast could explain. On August 7th, shortly after dawn, people began noticing an unusual substance scattered across cars, rooftops, sidewalks, and grassy fields. It did not resemble ordinary rain. Witnesses described countless small, gelatinous blobs covering the ground. Most were translucent or milky white, with a texture often compared to soft jelly or partially melted gelatin. Individually, the blobs measured only a fraction of an inch across, but together they reportedly coated large sections of the town. The weather itself appeared calm. No thunderstorms had passed through the area. There were no reports of hail, heavy winds, or other conditions that might readily explain the phenomenon. Residents stepping outside found themselves confronted by a material unlike anything they had previously encountered. Naturally, curiosity spread quickly. Some people collected samples in jars or plastic containers, hoping that laboratory analysis would reveal their origin. Others simply watched as the strange material slowly dissolved or disappeared beneath the warming daylight. Then, another detail began attracting attention. Several residents reported becoming ill shortly after coming into contact with the mysterious substance. According to local accounts, symptoms included flu-like discomfort, dizziness, fatigue, and respiratory problems. One family claimed that their pets also experienced unexplained illness around the same period. Whether these illnesses were directly connected to the gelatinous material remains one of the central questions surrounding the case. As news of the incident spread, samples reportedly reached several laboratories for examination. The published accounts of those analyses vary considerably. Some reports claimed that technicians identified human white blood cells within the substance. Others suggested the material contained bacteria or simple organic matter commonly found in nature. Still, other descriptions concluded that the samples had deteriorated before thorough testing could be completed, preventing any definitive identification. Unfortunately, no comprehensive peer-reviewed scientific study has resolved the matter. This uncertainty has allowed competing explanations to persist for decades. One of the most widely discussed natural theories involves colonies of microorganisms. Certain species of cyanobacteria and gelatinous algae can form translucent masses under specific environmental conditions. During periods of unusual weather, these organisms may become dispersed and deposited over wide areas. However, critics argue that such biological material does not fully match every eyewitness description, particularly the reports of blobs apparently falling directly from the sky. Another explanation centers on atmospheric transport. Strong winds are capable of carrying organic debris over considerable distances. Fragments of jellyfish, frog spawn, pollen, fungal material, or other biological substances might theoretically become suspended before eventually descending with rainfall. Although unusual, similar events have occasionally been documented elsewhere. Yet, no specific source was ever identified for the Oakville material. The timing also encouraged speculation. Some residents noted that military aircraft had reportedly been operating in the broader region during that period. This led to theories suggesting that the blobs resulted from military exercises, experimental biological testing, or substances released accidentally from aircraft. Government officials denied any connection. No publicly available evidence has confirmed that military operations produced or dispersed the material observed in Oakville. As with many unexplained events, more extraordinary interpretations eventually emerged. Some writers suggested extraterrestrial origins, proposing that the blobs represented biological residue associated with unidentified aerial phenomena. Others imagined unknown life forms existing high within Earth's atmosphere, rarely descending to the surface under unusual environmental conditions. These ideas remain speculative and lack supporting scientific evidence. Nevertheless, they continue to capture the imagination because the available facts leave significant gaps. One challenge facing investigators is the quality of the surviving evidence. Most of the original samples were either consumed during testing, improperly preserved, or eventually degraded. Gelatinous organic materials naturally break down over time, making later analysis impossible. As a result, much of the modern discussion depends upon witness testimony, newspaper reports, and recollections gathered years after the event. Even the number of incidents remains uncertain. Some accounts suggest the blobs fell repeatedly over several days, while others emphasize only a single morning. Such variations are common in cases where numerous independent witnesses attempt to reconstruct unusual events from memory. Today, Oakville has largely returned to the quiet routines for which it has long been known. Rain still falls across the forests. Morning mist still settles over fields and rooftops. Visitors passing through would likely never suspect that this peaceful community once became the focus of an international mystery involving unidentified material descending from the sky. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the Oakville Blobs is that they challenge assumptions without demanding extraordinary conclusions. The event may ultimately have a perfectly natural explanation that simply has not been documented. Or it may represent a rare combination of environmental conditions unlikely to occur again. Whatever the truth may be, the mystery persists because the evidence remains incomplete, balanced between scientific curiosity and unanswered questions. Somewhere within those vanished translucent fragments may have existed an explanation that dissolved almost as quickly as the material itself, leaving only memories, conflicting reports, and the enduring possibility that nature still holds phenomena we have yet to fully understand. The Oakville Blobs remind us that some mysteries drift down from the sky, leaving behind only fleeting traces before disappearing almost as quickly as they arrived. Our next story is different. Its mystery was never found in a physical object or an unexplained substance, but within the extraordinary bond shared by two sisters whose lives continue to challenge psychology, medicine, and our understanding of human connection. In the quiet Welsh town of Haverfordwest, rows of modest homes stand beneath changing skies, their streets carrying the familiar sounds of everyday life. Schools, parks, and neighborhood shops create the rhythm of an ordinary community where children grow up together and families know one another by name. Yet, behind the front door of one unremarkable house, an unusual relationship was unfolding, one that would eventually become known around the world. June and Jennifer Gibbons were born on April 11, 1963, identical twins to parents who had emigrated from Barbados to the United Kingdom. From the beginning, the sisters appeared unusually close. Twins often develop deep emotional bonds, but those who knew June and Jennifer soon noticed something that set them apart. They spoke almost exclusively to each other. When adults addressed them, they frequently remained silent. Teachers struggled to encourage conversation. Classmates described them as distant, inseparable, and difficult to approach. Yet, when alone together, the sisters communicated rapidly in what sounded like a private language. Some researchers later suggested that their speech was not an entirely invented language, but rather an extremely accelerated form of English understood only by the twins themselves. To outsiders, however, it was nearly impossible to follow. As they grew older, their isolation deepened. Attempts were made to separate them at school in hopes that each would develop greater independence. Instead of improving the situation, the separation reportedly caused both girls significant emotional distress. Their silence became even more pronounced, reinforcing the impression that each sister existed as the other's entire social world. The twins also created elaborate imaginary lives. They wrote stories, kept journals, and developed fictional characters with remarkable detail. Both displayed considerable creativity, filling notebooks with novels, poems, and dramatic narratives. Their writing often explored themes of identity, isolation, obsession, and relationships that blurred the boundaries between affection and rivalry. It was within these private worlds that another mystery emerged. Although inseparable, June and Jennifer's relationship appeared increasingly conflicted. According to later accounts, they sometimes mirrored one another's movements almost perfectly, as though performing an unconscious dance. Family members and observers described moments when one twin seemed unable to act without the other responding in kind. Yet, alongside this extraordinary synchronization existed deep resentment. Each reportedly expressed the belief that life would somehow improve if the other were absent. This paradox fascinated psychologists. How could two people appear so emotionally dependent while simultaneously feeling trapped by that very connection? During adolescence, the sisters' lives took another troubling turn. They became involved in a series of acts including vandalism, theft, and arson. Although the offenses were relatively limited in scale, the pattern alarmed authorities. In 1981, both sisters were admitted to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric institution in England, after being found guilty of criminal offenses and judged to require psychiatric treatment. Their stay lasted more than a decade. Doctors, psychologists, and researchers attempted to understand the remarkable dynamic between them. Numerous diagnoses were considered, including selective mutism, schizophrenia, autism spectrum conditions, personality disorders, and trauma-related explanations. No single diagnosis fully accounted for their behavior. Selective mutism appeared consistent with their refusal to speak to most people, yet it did not explain the extraordinary intensity of their bond. Other proposed conditions addressed certain aspects of their personalities while leaving equally important questions unresolved. The sisters themselves continued writing. Their diaries, later examined by researchers and journalists, revealed complex emotions that often contradicted one another. They described love and resentment, dependence and frustration, companionship and imprisonment. Reading these journals, one gains the impression of two individuals struggling to define themselves while remaining psychologically intertwined. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the story involves a statement frequently attributed to the twins. According to several accounts, they came to believe that only one of them could truly live a normal life. Whether this belief developed gradually or emerged through years of institutional treatment remains uncertain. Then, in 1993, an unexpected tragedy occurred. After being transferred from Broadmoor to a lower security facility, Jennifer Gibbons suddenly collapsed during the journey. Despite medical efforts, she died shortly afterward at the age of 30. An autopsy identified acute inflammation of the heart, known as myocarditis, but investigators found no evidence of poisoning, violence, or suicide. The precise reason for the sudden onset remained unclear. Following Jennifer's death, something remarkable happened. June gradually began speaking with other people. For the first time in her life, she lived independently, communicated openly, and eventually described feeling as though she had been released from an invisible burden. Her transformation has become one of the most debated aspects of the entire case. Did profound grief fundamentally change her psychological state? Had Jennifer's death broken a pattern of mutual dependence that neither sister could escape while both remained alive? Or was the timing merely an extraordinary coincidence? The story of the silent twins continues to attract psychologists, writers, filmmakers, and historians because it resists simple explanation. It is neither a conventional medical mystery nor an ordinary criminal case. Instead, it exists at the intersection of psychology, identity, family, and the extraordinary complexities of human relationships. Today, the journals, interviews, and medical records left behind offer valuable insight but few definitive answers. They reveal two intelligent, imaginative women whose lives unfolded in ways that challenged every attempt at easy interpretation. Were June and Jennifer shaped primarily by circumstance, by an exceptionally rare psychological condition, or by a bond so unique that existing scientific language still struggles to describe it? Whatever the answer may be, their story remains a quiet reminder that some of the deepest mysteries are not hidden in distant landscapes or ancient ruins, but within the human mind itself, where even the closest connections can conceal questions that endure long after the voices have finally been heard.
The silent twins remind us that some of the greatest mysteries are not carved into stone or scattered across the landscape, but hidden within words, silence, and the human mind. Our next story continues that theme, shifting from an unspoken language between two sisters to a written code that has challenged generations of historians, cryptographers, and treasure hunters alike. The foothills of Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains are a landscape of quiet beauty. Dense forests cover rolling hills, narrow rivers wind through fertile valleys, and old country roads disappear into stretches of wilderness that seem largely unchanged by time. It is a place where legends settle easily into the scenery, where forgotten cabins and abandoned trails invite the imagination to wander. Somewhere within this landscape, according to one of America's most enduring legends, an immense fortune may still lie hidden beneath the earth. The mystery begins in the early 19th century with a man known as Thomas J. Beale. According to a pamphlet published in 1885, Beale arrived at a hotel in Lynchburg, Virginia, in 1820, carrying an iron box. Before departing on another journey, he entrusted the locked container to the hotel's owner, Robert Morris, with strict instructions that it remain unopened unless he failed to return within a specified number of years. Beale never came back. Years later, after waiting far longer than instructed, Morris reportedly opened the box. Inside were several sheets filled with long sequences of numbers. No ordinary letters, no recognizable words, only columns of carefully arranged numerical codes. Accompanying the papers was a letter explaining their purpose. According to the account, Beale and a group of companions had discovered an enormous deposit of gold, silver, and precious jewels during an expedition somewhere in the American West. They allegedly transported the treasure across the country and secretly buried it in Bedford County, Virginia. The 3 encrypted documents supposedly contained everything needed to recover it. One described the treasure itself. Another identified its exact location. The third listed the names of the rightful heirs. The challenge was simple in theory. Crack the codes, and the treasure could be found. For years, the numerical sequences resisted every attempt at interpretation. Then, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. One of the 3 ciphers was reportedly deciphered using the United States Declaration of Independence as a key. By matching the numbers to specific words within the document, the second cipher revealed an astonishing inventory. According to the decoded message, the buried cache contained thousands of pounds of gold, silver, and jewels worth millions of dollars in today's value. The description transformed an obscure puzzle into an international fascination. If one cipher could be solved, surely the others could as well. Yet despite nearly 2 centuries of effort, the remaining 2 encrypted documents have never been conclusively deciphered. This is where the mystery truly begins. Professional cryptographers, amateur code breakers, mathematicians, linguists, historians, and computer scientists have all examined the Beale ciphers. Countless decoding techniques have been attempted, including frequency analysis, substitution systems, transposition methods, and modern computational approaches. None has produced a universally accepted solution. The success of the second cipher only deepens the puzzle. If its decoding is genuine, why have the first and third resisted every method applied to them? One possibility is that they require entirely different keys. The Declaration of Independence may unlock only the inventory, while the remaining messages could depend upon books, documents, or texts that have long since disappeared. If those original keys no longer exist, the remaining ciphers may be effectively impossible to solve. Another explanation questions the authenticity of the entire story. Many historians point to the 1885 pamphlet itself. No independently verified records have confirmed Thomas J. Beale's remarkable treasure expedition. Likewise, evidence supporting Robert Morris's account remains surprisingly limited. Some researchers argue that the pamphlet may have been created primarily to attract readers during an era when treasure stories enjoyed enormous popularity. If so, the solved second cipher could have been deliberately designed to make the unsolved messages appear genuine. Yet, even this theory leaves unanswered questions. If the story were merely an elaborate hoax, why construct 2 additional ciphers that have resisted generations of expert analysis? Creating convincing unsolved codes capable of withstanding nearly 200 years of scrutiny would itself require extraordinary planning and technical skill. Naturally,
more imaginative interpretations have emerged. Some treasure hunters remain convinced that the fortune genuinely exists, still buried somewhere within Virginia's hills. Others believe the location has already been discovered secretly, its recovery deliberately concealed from public knowledge. A few researchers even suggest that the ciphers contain hidden layers of meaning beyond treasure, perhaps political messages, private correspondence, or symbolic writings disguised beneath numerical patterns. No evidence has confirmed these possibilities. Meanwhile, searches for the alleged treasure continue. Over the decades, individuals have explored caves, dug on private land with permission, surveyed remote valleys, and examined countless possible hiding places suggested by various interpretations of the remaining codes. Modern technologies, including ground-penetrating radar and digital mapping, have added new tools to the search. Still, nothing definitively linked to Beale's treasure has ever been recovered. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not the treasure itself, but the remarkable endurance of the legend. Very few unsolved puzzles have inspired such sustained attention across generations. Each new advance in cryptography revives hope that the remaining messages might finally yield their secrets. Yet every attempt ends in the same quiet silence that has surrounded the ciphers since they first emerged from the locked iron box. Today, the Blue Ridge Mountains remain as tranquil as ever. Forests continue growing over forgotten trails, rivers carve their patient paths through ancient stone, and countless places still seem capable of concealing remarkable secrets. Whether the Beale ciphers protect the location of a real buried fortune, preserve the work of an ingenious storyteller, or represent a puzzle whose solution has been lost to history, they continue to invite one irresistible question. Somewhere among those endless rows of numbers, does the final answer still exist, waiting for the one person who will read them in exactly the right way?
The Beale ciphers remind us that some mysteries are hidden within numbers, patiently waiting for a key that may never be found. Our next story abandons coded messages and buried treasure for something far simpler, yet perhaps even more elusive. A single light that has appeared in the darkness for generations, witnessed by countless observers, but never fully explained. Deep within the forests of Clark County, Arkansas, an old railroad line cuts through rolling hills and dense pine woods. During the day, the tracks seem almost ordinary, stretching quietly between towering trees that whisper in the breeze. At night, however, the landscape changes. The darkness becomes nearly complete, broken only by moonlight filtering through branches and the occasional distant call of nocturnal wildlife. It is in this silence that many visitors begin watching the tracks, waiting for something they cannot predict, but hope they might witness. They are waiting for the Gurdon Light. Near the small town of Jourdain, the mysterious glow has been reported for well over a century. Witnesses describe a floating orb of light that appears along or near the railroad tracks, moving silently through the darkness before vanishing without warning. Some say it shines with a soft white glow. Others describe shades of blue, orange, or pale yellow. Occasionally, observers claim the light changes color while in motion, growing brighter before fading once again into the night. Unlike many unexplained phenomena witnessed only once or twice, the Gurdon Light has been reported repeatedly by generations of residents, railway workers, investigators, tourists, and curious travelers. The stories often begin the same way. Someone notices what appears to be a lantern in the distance. At first, the explanation seems obvious. Railroads once relied heavily on signal lanterns carried by workers inspecting tracks after dark. A solitary light moving along the rails would have attracted little attention during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Yet something about this light behaves differently. Witnesses frequently describe it hovering above the tracks without any visible person carrying it. At times, it appears to drift toward observers before abruptly stopping, reversing direction, or disappearing entirely. Others claim it floats through the surrounding trees, ignoring the physical landscape altogether. No footsteps accompany it. No voices emerge from the darkness. Only the light itself. Local legend connects the mystery to a tragic event said to have occurred during the railroad's early history. According to the most familiar version of the story, a railroad worker was accidentally struck by a train while inspecting the tracks. The collision reportedly claimed his life in a particularly violent manner, leaving his head separated from his body. Ever since, local folklore says, the worker's spirit has wandered the railway carrying a lantern while endlessly searching for what was lost. It is a haunting image. A lone figure moving through the Arkansas woods, guided only by an eternal light. Stories of ghost lights associated with railroads appear throughout many parts of the world, but the Gurdon Light remains one of the most enduring examples in American folklore. Historical records do document fatal railway accidents in the region. One incident frequently associated with the legend involved railroad foreman William McLean, who died in 1931 after being struck by a train during a dispute involving another employee. While the details differ from some versions of the ghost story, the tragedy has often become intertwined with local tradition. Whether the legend originated directly from this event or absorbed elements from multiple historical accidents remains uncertain. Folklore has a way of reshaping history over time. As generations repeat a story, factual details often blend with symbolism until separating one from the other becomes nearly impossible. Of course, not everyone believes the Gurdon Light is supernatural. Scientists have proposed several natural explanations. One possibility involves atmospheric refraction. Under certain weather conditions, distant lights can appear displaced, magnified, or suspended above the horizon due to variations in air temperature. This phenomenon, sometimes called a superior mirage, has produced remarkably convincing optical illusions elsewhere in the world. Could distant vehicle headlights or lights from nearby communities be bending across the landscape in unexpected ways? Some researchers believe this explanation deserves serious consideration. Others point toward geological activity. Certain minerals, particularly quartz-bearing rocks under mechanical stress, have been suggested as possible sources of unusual luminous phenomena. Laboratory experiments have demonstrated that crushing specific crystals can produce brief flashes of light, a process known as triboluminescence. Some scientists have wondered whether subtle geological movements beneath the Earth's surface might occasionally generate glowing atmospheric effects. While intriguing, this hypothesis remains difficult to confirm under real-world conditions. Another explanation focuses on combustible gases. Wetlands sometimes produce methane and other naturally occurring gases that, under rare circumstances, may ignite and create faint glowing lights historically known as will-o'-the-wisps. However, critics note that the Gurdon Light often appears to move purposefully over considerable distances rather than behaving like stationary marsh gas flames. Then, there are those who have attempted direct investigation. Over the years, photographers, paranormal researchers, physicists, and amateur investigators have visited the railroad tracks hoping to document the phenomenon. Some have reported successful observations, capturing distant glowing lights on camera. Others have spent entire nights waiting without seeing anything unusual. This inconsistency has only strengthened the mystery. If the light were caused solely by predictable atmospheric conditions, why does it appear so irregularly? If it were merely distant headlights, why do experienced local residents insist they can distinguish it from ordinary traffic? As with many enduring mysteries, personal experience plays a powerful role. Those who believe they have witnessed the Gurdon Light often describe an encounter that feels profoundly different from observing an ordinary light source. Many speak not of fear, but of quiet fascination. a sense that something difficult to define has briefly revealed itself before returning to darkness. Skeptics respond that expectation itself can influence perception. Visitors arriving after hearing ghost stories may naturally interpret unfamiliar lights through the lens of local legend. Human vision is particularly vulnerable to misjudging distance, brightness, and movement in darkness, allowing ordinary phenomena to appear extraordinary. Yet even careful observers sometimes leave with unanswered questions. Perhaps that is why the Gurdon Light continues to attract attention after so many decades. Unlike mysteries dependent upon a single historical event, this phenomenon remains available to anyone willing to wait beside the tracks after sunset. Every clear night offers another opportunity to observe, investigate, and perhaps witness the same unexplained glow reported by countless people before. The old railroad still stretches through the Arkansas forest much as it always has. Pine trees sway gently above weathered rails. Crickets fill the silence between passing trains. The darkness remains patient, uninterrupted except by the occasional distant shimmer that may, or may not, appear beyond the bend. Whether the Gurdon Light represents an unusual optical phenomenon, a little understood feature of the natural world, a product of expectation and folklore, or something that has yet to find a place within conventional explanation, it continues to resist certainty. Somewhere along those quiet tracks, where history, legend, and observation converge beneath the night sky, a solitary light still waits. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not what the light is, but why it continues to appear just often enough to remind us that even in an age of satellites and scientific instruments, the darkness can still hold questions that refuse to fade. The Gurdon Light reminds us that some mysteries flicker in the darkness, appearing just long enough to leave us questioning what we have seen. Our next story is different. There are no glowing lights or whispered legends, only a quiet roadside, a forgotten cardboard box, and a child whose story remained unknown for generations. In the winter of 1957, the outskirts of Philadelphia were a mixture of open fields, narrow roads, and patches of dense woodland. It was a place where discarded objects often blended into the landscape, unnoticed by passing motorists. Along one isolated stretch of Susquehanna Road, a weathered cardboard box lay partially hidden among the brush. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than abandoned trash. Inside was the body of a young boy. The discovery was made on February 25, 1957. The child was estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old. He had light-colored hair, stood just over 3 feet tall, and showed signs that suggested he had suffered greatly before his death. There were bruises on his body, and his hair appeared to have been cut shortly before he was found. Despite an immediate police investigation, there was no identification, no missing person report that matched him, and no one came forward claiming to know who he was. Newspapers soon gave him a heartbreaking name: the boy in the box. Investigators launched one of the largest homicide investigations in Philadelphia's history. Thousands of flyers bearing the child's photograph were distributed throughout the city and neighboring states. Detectives checked school records, orphanages, hospitals, and adoption agencies. Fingerprints were taken, dental records were examined, every available lead was pursued. Yet every promising clue seemed to end in silence. The cardboard box itself became an important piece of evidence. It had originally been used to package a bassinet purchased from a department store. Detectives traced sales records, hoping to identify the buyer, but the effort produced no definitive answers. A distinctive blanket found with the child was also investigated, as were the clothing and other items recovered at the scene. None revealed his identity. As the years passed, numerous theories emerged. Some investigators believed the boy may have belonged to a family living on the margins of society, making his disappearance less likely to attract immediate attention. Others wondered whether he had lived in an institution or had been raised in isolation. Every possibility carried its own unanswered questions. One of the most widely discussed accounts surfaced years later through a woman identified publicly only as M. She claimed that her abusive mother had purchased the child and that he had died following severe mistreatment before being abandoned beside the road. Her statement contained certain details that appeared consistent with aspects of the investigation, leading some detectives to consider it seriously. However, other investigators questioned her reliability. No independent evidence conclusively verified her account, and significant portions of the story could not be confirmed. As a result, it remained one possible explanation among many rather than a definitive solution. Decade after decade, the case remained open. The unidentified child became a symbol of unresolved justice. His grave was visited by strangers who left flowers and toys. Artists created age-progressed images, imagining what he might have looked like had he survived. Advances in forensic science repeatedly renewed hope that modern technology could succeed where traditional investigation had failed. Eventually, those advances changed the course of the case. In the early 21st century, investigators extracted DNA using techniques unavailable in 1957. Through genetic genealogy and extensive family history research, authorities announced a major breakthrough in 2022. The boy was identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. For the first time in more than 65 years, the child had a name. The announcement marked a remarkable achievement in forensic science, demonstrating how modern genetic methods can restore identities once thought permanently lost. Yet while one profound question had finally been answered, many others remained. Who was responsible for Joseph's death? What circumstances led to his final days? Why did no one report him missing in a way that allowed investigators to find him in 1957? Authorities have continued investigating those questions, but no one has been publicly charged in connection with the case. Much of the historical evidence has faded with time, witnesses have passed away, and crucial details may have been lost forever. The mystery, then, has changed rather than disappeared. It is no longer the mystery of an unknown child, but of an identified child whose life and death are still only partially understood. Some observers believe forgotten family histories may still contain missing pieces. Others suggest that undiscovered records or overlooked testimony could one day provide a fuller picture of Joseph's brief life. More speculative ideas occasionally appear, but investigators continue to focus on evidence that can be tested and verified. Today, the roadside where the boy was discovered bears little resemblance to the landscape of 1957. Time has transformed the area, just as advances in science transformed the investigation. Yet the story continues to resonate because it reminds us that solving one mystery does not always solve them all. Joseph Augustus Zarelli is no longer known only as the boy in the box. His identity has been restored, ending one of America's longest-running unidentified person cases. But the deeper mystery, the story of what truly happened to him, who was responsible, and why his life ended so tragically, remains unfinished. Somewhere within the fading memories of the past, there may still be answers waiting to emerge, completing a story that has remained incomplete for generations.